Hey there, tonight we're diving into the rise and fall of the Ottoman Empire, where sultans, harems and janissaries collide. And the truth is, those sultans didn't just lounge on cushions all day. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Osman I wasn't exactly born with a silver spoon in his mouth, more like a rusty horseshoe, if anything. In 1299, he wasn't planning to launch what would become a colossal empire. He was just a guy with a tribe, some horses and big dreams, kind of like a medieval Steve Jobs, but instead of a garage, he had the Anatolian plains. This scrappy startup, the Ottoman Empire, began in a small town called Surgut, which probably had more sheep than people back then. Osman's rise was like watching a particularly ambitious episode of Game of Thrones, without the dragons, but with plenty of swordplay and intrigue. He wasn't just about swinging swords, though. Osman had a knack for alliances that would make a modern-day diplomat blush. He cozied up to the right neighbors, married the right daughter, and before anyone could say Byzantine, his domain was expanding faster than a teenager's social media following. Numbers. We're talking about a growth spurt that took his tribe from a few hundred square miles to an area so large it would eventually stretch from the edges of Vienna to the sweaty sands of Yemen. Now, before we get too swept away by tales of chivalrous warriors and noble quests, let's hit the pause button and talk about the Ghazi myth. The Ottomans liked to paint themselves as holy warriors, which was a great story for recruitment and PR. But the reality, Osman and his buddies were less about divine missions and more about opportunistic land grabs. When the opportunity arose, they didn't just knock on the door of a neighboring city. They kicked it down and redecorated. Sometimes they'd even leave a whoops, didn't mean to conquer that note. Because why not? Osman's strategy was a mix of sharp military tactics and shrewd diplomacy. He didn't just go for the jugular. He went for the Achilles heel, targeting the vulnerable Byzantine Empire like a cat, eyeing a limping mouse. His first major success came when he nabbed the fortress of Bilesic around 1302. The Byzantines probably thought they could swat him away like an annoying fly, but Osman had other ideas. By the time they realized he was more like a persistent hornet, it was too late. And what's an empire without a legend or two? There's a charming little story that Osman dreamed of a tree growing from his navel, its branches spreading across the world. A bit of wishful thinking, perhaps, but it makes for a catchy origin story. One part botanical fantasy, one part imperial ambition. In reality, Osman's empire didn't grow from a dream. It grew from a potent mix of military prowess, strategic marriages, and the ability to outlast and outwit opponents. As the Ottoman Empire began its meteoric rise, it wasn't just about cavalry charges and sword fights. There were also the more mundane, but crucial elements: logistics, supply chains, and governance. Imagine trying to manage a growing empire with no Google Maps, no emails, and definitely no pizza delivery. Yet Osman and his successors managed to build an administrative system that would keep their empire ticking like a well-oiled machine for centuries. Osman's successors, particularly his son Orhan, took the reins and galloped further into history. By the time Orhan was done, the Ottomans had swallowed up chunks of the Byzantine Empire and were eyeing bigger bites. The empire's capital moved to Bursa in 1326, marking another step in its expansion. Orhan wasn't just interested in conquest, he was also a bit of a builder. Under his rule, public buildings and mosques began to dart the landscape, laying the groundwork for what would become one of history's most enduring empires. It's safe to say that Osman's little startup didn't just survive, it thrived, and all without a single IPO. The early Ottomans played the long game, leveraging every advantage, making the right deals, and never shying away from a good old-fashioned brawl when necessary. And from these humble beginnings came an empire that would eventually dictate terms to kings and sultans, change the course of history, and redefine the map of Europe and Asia. So, as we wrap up this first chapter of Ottoman history, let's take a moment to appreciate Osman's unlikely success story. It started with a dream, or maybe a tree, and ended with a sprawling empire. Not too shabby for a guy who started out with just a few followers and a whole lot of ambition. Stick around, because the Ottomans are just getting warmed up. Next, we'll see how they continue to expand and eventually bump heads with some of history's other big players. But that's a tale for another time. As we leave behind the modest beginnings of Osman and his clan, the Ottoman Empire starts to flex its adolescent muscles. Enter Mehmed Roman II, also known as Mehmed the Conqueror, who clearly took world domination as more than just a catchy slogan. This guy didn't just want to be remembered, he wanted to redefine the map, and spoiler alert, he did just that with a flair for drama worthy of a Netflix series. Mehmed ascended the throne in 1444, a tender age of 12. Imagine being a preteen, and instead of worrying about algebra, you're strategizing the fate of empires. Talk about an intense childhood. But Mehmed wasn't just any kid. He had plans bigger than his age suggested. Fast forward to 1453, and he's all grown up, ready to take on the crown jewel of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople. The city, with its formidable walls and strategic location, was like the ultimate boss level in a video game. Many had tried and failed, but Mehmed was determined to be the one who finally cracked the code. Now, let's talk about that siege. This wasn't your average medieval brawl. Mehmed came prepared with a state-of-the-art arsenal that would make any military enthusiast drool. The Ottomans had brought along the basilica, a massive cannon that could hurl stone balls weighing up to 200 pounds. That's about the weight of a small car, if you're trying to picture it. The sheer power of these cannons was enough to make the Byzantine defenders rethink their life choices. Over 53 days, the Ottomans bombarded the city's walls, and Mehmed's savvy use of both land and sea assaults finally breached the seemingly impregnable defenses. On May 29, 1453, Constantinople fell, and with it, the Byzantine Empire's long-held grip on the region crumbled. Mehmed rode triumphantly through the gates, no doubt with a playlist of victory tunes blaring in his mind. The city was renamed Istanbul, and a new era began. If you're humming a certain song about Istanbul not being Constantinople, you're not alone. But let's pause that melody for a moment and consider the significance. This wasn't just a change of name, it was a seismic shift in power. The fall of Constantinople marked the end of the medieval era and the dawn of the Renaissance, sending shockwaves across Europe. Mehmed's conquest wasn't just about military might, it was also about cultural integration and urban transformation. He invited people of different religions and ethnicities to settle in Istanbul, turning it into a vibrant, cosmopolitan hub. This was a melting pot before melting pots were cool. Meanwhile, the city's transformation included the conversion of the Hagia Sophia from a cathedral into a mosque, a move that symbolized the empire's new Islamic identity while respecting its architectural grandeur. Mehmed wasn't just building an empire, he was crafting a legacy that merged the old with the new. Behind the scenes, the administrative machinery of the Ottoman Empire was humming along like a well-tuned orchestra. The empire's bureaucracy was a marvel of its time, with a civil service structure that could give modern governments a run for their money. The Ottomans implemented a system of meritocracy in their devshirme system, recruiting Christian boys from the Balkans and training them as soldiers or administrators. This wasn't just about filling ranks, it was about ensuring loyalty and creating a class of highly skilled officials who'd help run the empire more efficiently than a Swiss watch. And let's not forget the Janissaries, the elite infantry units who were the empire's not-so-secret weapon. These guys were the cream of the crop, trained from a young age to serve the Sultan with unwavering loyalty. Imagine if the Spartans had a modern makeover, and you're pretty close to understanding their role. The Janissaries were instrumental in both expanding the empire and maintaining order within its borders. But as with any powerful machine, there were a few loose screws. The Ottoman administrative system, despite its brilliance, wasn't immune to the occasional bout of madness. Bureaucratic infighting and corruption were like unwanted guests that just wouldn't leave. Yet, the Ottomans had a knack for balancing chaos with order, ensuring the empire continued to thrive even when things got a little hairy behind the curtains. Mehmed's reign wasn't just about smashing down walls or reshaping cities. It was about creating a political and cultural juggernaut that could withstand the tests of time. His vision laid the foundation for an empire that would straddle 3 continents and last over 6 centuries. As much as the romantic tales of chivalrous sultans and noble warriors tickle the imagination, it's crucial to remember the gritty realities, the clashing interests, the stomach-churning politics, and yes, even the occasional administrative blunder. So there you have it, the empire in its teenage growth spurt, navigating the awkwardness of rapid expansion while trying to keep its affairs in order. The Ottomans were on a roll, but like any teenager, they were also setting themselves up for some serious growing pains. Mehmed the Conqueror may have kicked off a new era with his larger-than-life conquests, but the story of the Ottoman Empire is far from over. The next chapters will see even more drama, intrigue, and yes, a few more sieges. Because in the world of empires, the only constant is change. Stick around, because the Ottomans are just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. As the Ottomans strutted into their golden age like a rock band on a world tour, it was Suleiman the Magnificent who took center stage, and boy, did he know how to work a crowd. Suleiman wasn't just any sultan. He was the Ottoman Empire's answer to a Renaissance man, blending military genius with a flair for cultural patronage that had Europe swooning like a teenager at a pop concert. Under his rule, the empire reached its zenith, both territorially and culturally, making even the Habsburgs feel a bit insecure about their own regal swagger. Let's kick things off with the empire's military prowess, where Suleiman proved he wasn't just a pretty face with a fancy hat. He led 13 campaigns, expanding the empire's reach into Europe with all the ambition of a monopoly player who keeps buying up Boardwalk and Park Place. In 1526, he crushed the Hungarians at the Battle of Mohács, a victory that opened the door to Central Europe faster than you can say checkmate. The battlefield was a gruesome sight, with 20,000 Hungarian troops falling in a single afternoon. By the time the dust settled, Hungary was pretty much an Ottoman vassal, and the empire's map had more new lines than an overzealous cartographer's sketchbook. But it wasn't just about flexing military muscle. Suleiman was also a savvy statesman who knew the value of a well-inked treaty. His alliance with Francis I of France in 1536 was a diplomatic masterstroke that had Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, gritting his teeth in frustration. Imagine a geopolitical chess game where everyone's convinced they're playing checkers, and you'll get the idea. This Franco-Ottoman alliance was the first between a Christian power and a Muslim state, a move so audacious it had the Vatican clutching its rosary beads. However, Suleiman's empire building wasn't all swords and treaties. The Sultan was a patron of the arts, and under his reign, Istanbul became a cultural mecca that would make the Renaissance cities of Italy green with envy. The architect Mimar Sinan, the empire's answer to Michelangelo, was given free rein to reshape the skyline with masks and public buildings that still draw tourists' eyes upward today. The Suleimani Mosque, completed in 1558, was Sinan's piece de résistance, a structure so impressive it seemed to whisper, "Top that, Vatican." While Suleiman was busy being the poster child for Ottoman splendor, the empire was also experiencing a cultural renaissance. Poetry, music, and science flourished, with scholars flocking to Istanbul like moths to a flame. This wasn't just a golden age, it was a full-on, gilded extravaganza. The empire's legal system, the canon, was codified under Suleiman's watchful eye, earning him the moniker, the lawgiver. It was a legal framework so comprehensive that even today's lawyers might find themselves nodding in grudging admiration. But behind the glittering facade, cracks were beginning to form, and just like any good historical drama, the seeds of decline were quietly taking root. Managing an empire that stretched from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia wasn't exactly a walk in the park. The Janissaries, once the empire's elite troops, were becoming more of a political headache than a military asset. Their increasing demands for privileges and pay were like dealing with a rock band that had let fame go to its head, and the sultans were finding it harder to keep them in line. Moreover, the economic landscape was shifting. The discovery of new trade routes by the Portuguese and Spanish meant that the silk and spice routes, once the lifeblood of the empire's economy, were losing their luster faster than you can say globalization. The empire's coffers, once overflowing with the wealth of 2 continents, were beginning to feel the pinch. Inflation reared its ugly head, as the influx of silver from the New World devalued currency, making it harder to maintain the lavish lifestyle the Ottomans had become accustomed to. And then there was the issue of succession. Ottoman sultans had a peculiar way of handling the next-in-line situation, fratricide. The practice of eliminating rival claimants might have kept the throne warm for the strongest contender, but it also meant that some of the most capable potential leaders were, quite literally, cut out of the picture. Suleiman's own heir, Mustafa, was executed on charges of treason, a move that many historians view as one of the Sultan's greatest blunders. It was a Shakespearean tragedy played out in real life, with the empire's future hanging in the balance. As Suleiman's reign approached its twilight years, the empire he had built began to show signs of wear and tear. The administrative system, once the envy of Europe, was starting to buckle under the weight of corruption and inefficiency. Provincial governors, or beys, were more interested in lining their own pockets than maintaining the Sultan's authority, and the central government's grip on its far-flung territories was slipping like sand through fingers. Suleiman's final campaign in 1566, the siege of Shajdvar, was a bittersweet victory. The fortress fell, but the Sultan died before he could see it. His death marked the end of an era, and while the Ottomans continued to be a formidable power, the empire would never again reach the heights it had under his rule. The Golden Age, with all its triumphs and tribulations, set the stage for a period of stagnation and introspection. So there you have it, a tale of glory and grit, of artistic brilliance and military might, with just enough intrigue and drama to keep even the most jaded historian on the edge of their seat. As the curtain falls on Suleiman the Magnificent's reign, the Ottoman Empire stands at a crossroads, its future uncertain, but its legacy undeniable. The story is far from over, and as we look ahead, the empire's fortunes will continue to rise and fall, driven by the ambitions of sultans and the tides of history. Stay tuned, because the next act in this epic saga is sure to be just as captivating as the last. As Suleiman's final bow echoed through the halls of history, the Ottoman Empire braced itself for a sequel that promised less blockbuster and more daytime soap opera. It was like watching a once great band slowly unravel, each new sultan another ill-advised reunion tour. The empire's decline was not a swift plunge, but rather a centuries-long slide, peppered with enough intrigue, incompetence, and drama to keep any history buff riveted. Our first stop on this tumultuous journey is the Battle of Lepanto in 1571. Picture it, a naval showdown that made Pirates of the Caribbean look like a kiddie pool skirmish. The Ottomans met the Holy League, a coalition of European Catholic maritime states, in a clash that would become one of the largest naval battles in history. On October 7, 1571, over 400 ships collided in the Gulf of Patras. The Holy League's victory was decisive, and the Ottomans lost about 200 galleys and 30,000 men. It was a staggering blow, reminiscent of a heavyweight champion getting floored by a surprise uppercut. The battle didn't sink the Ottoman navy for good, but it sure dealt it a crippling punch. Now, let's talk stereotypes, the so-called sick man of Europe. This moniker didn't just pop out of thin air. It was coined in the 19th century, but the seeds were planted much earlier. By the late 16th century, the empire's golden years were gleaming in the rearview mirror. Economic woes began to mount like unpaid parking tickets. The influx of silver from the New World inflated prices, and the Ottomans found themselves grappling with a currency crisis that would put Wall Street to shame. It's hard to run an empire when your coins are worth less than the metal they are made of. But wait, there's more. The Ottomans weren't just battling economic demons. The military had its share of nightmares too. The Janissaries, once the empire's elite forces, had become more like demanding divas than disciplined soldiers. They were no longer content with just battlefield glory. They wanted political power, like rock stars, insisting on creative control. This internal strife weakened the military just as external threats were closing in. And speaking of external threats, let's take a detour to the sieges of Vienna. The first attempt in 1529 under Suleiman was a close call, but the Ottomans were repelled by a combination of foul weather and fierce resistance. Fast forward to 1683, and it's déjà vu as the Ottomans make another play for the Austrian capital. This time, they brought a massive army. estimated at around 150,000 troops, under the command of Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa. Yet, despite their numbers, the Ottomans were once again thwarted, thanks to the timely intervention of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth led by King John Roman III Sobieski. The Second Siege of Vienna ended in a humiliating retreat, marking a turning point in the empire's territorial ambitions. So, was the Ottoman Empire really the sick man, or was it just suffering from a case of bad PR? Sure, they had their share of blunders and bureaucratic bloat, but the empire was still a force to be reckoned with, even if its power was more bark than bite by the 18th century. The Ottomans retained significant influence in the Balkans, the Middle East, and North Africa, outlasting many of their European counterparts. They were like a heavyweight boxer who's gone a few rounds too many, but still packs a mean punch. The empire's decline was a complex cocktail of financial strain, military setbacks, and a rotating cast of sultans who were more often than not, shall we say, less than spectacular. As the 17th century rolled into the 18th, it was evident that the empire's glory days were fading. The administrative system, once a model of efficiency, began to sag under the weight of corruption and nepotism. Provincial governors acted more like feudal lords than representatives of the Sultan, and the central government's control slipped, not unlike butter on a hot skillet. Yet, even as the empire stumbled, it managed to adapt and survive. The Ottomans launched a series of reforms in the 18th and 19th centuries in a bid to modernize and stave off collapse. These efforts, known as the Tanzimat reforms, aimed to centralize administration, modernize the military, and boost the economy. It was a last-ditch effort to revive the empire's fortunes, a bit like trying to reboot a classic TV show with a new cast. In truth, the Ottomans were caught in a changing world, struggling to keep up with the rapid pace of technological and political shifts occurring in Europe. The Industrial Revolution was transforming economies and societies, while the Ottomans were trying to maintain an empire built on medieval foundations. It was a classic case of too little, too late, as the empire slowly ceded ground to rising European powers. As we draw this act to a close, the Ottoman Empire stands at a crossroads. Beset by internal challenges and external pressures, its future is uncertain. But one thing is clear: the story is far from over, and the next chapter promises more intrigue, ambition, and the relentless march of history. So stay tuned, dear listener, because the Ottoman Empire's soap opera is about to take another dramatic turn, and you won't want to miss a single twist in this epic tale. The Ottoman Empire's story is like one of those epic novels that seem to have more chapters than you can count, each filled with twists that keep even the most jaded reader hooked. But as we turn the page to the early 20th century, it's clear that the narrative is heading toward a climax of Shakespearean proportions. Enter the Young Turks, a reformist group with more ambition than a reality TV star at a Hollywood party. They came charging onto the scene with a mission to modernize the empire, which, let's be honest, was overdue for a makeover. These guys weren't just talking about swapping out drapes. They wanted to overhaul the entire Ottoman system from the inside out. In 1908, the Young Turks orchestrated a coup that restored the Ottoman constitution and parliament, which had been gathering dust since 1878. The empire was like a rusty old machine, and the Young Turks were determined to grease the gears and get it running smoothly again. But while they were high on ideals, they were a bit low on unity. Factionalism within the group meant that not everyone was on the same page, leading to policies that sometimes seemed as coordinated as a group of cats trying to line dance. Despite their internal squabbles, the Young Turks managed to implement some significant reforms. They introduced compulsory military service, standardized education, and tried to centralize government administration. Think of it as an early 20th century version of trying to teach your grandparents how to use a smartphone. However, these changes were met with mixed results. The empire was a patchwork of ethnicities and religions, and not everyone was thrilled about the push for a homogenized, Turkish-centric identity. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, only this time the peg was an entire empire, and the hole was an increasingly nationalistic world. World War I was the empire's last hurrah, though hurrah is probably not the word most historians would choose. The Ottomans found themselves aligned with the Central Powers. a decision that was about as wise as investing in Blockbuster in the age of streaming. They hoped that a victorious alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary would help them reclaim lost territories and restore their former glory. Instead, it turned out to be a one-way ticket to oblivion. By the war's end in 1918, the Ottomans were on the losing side, their empire in tatters and their economy in ruins, a classic case of the wrong horse in the wrong race. Now, let's talk treaties, specifically the Treaty of Sevres in 1920, which was less of a treaty and more of a demolition order. Picture the Ottoman Empire as a massive estate, and the Treaty of Sevres as the wrecking ball that smashed it to pieces. The Allies carved up the empire like a Thanksgiving turkey, with bits going to Greece, Britain, France, and Italy. The Ottoman heartland was left a shadow of its former self, with even Istanbul's fate hanging in the balance. It was a diplomatic humiliation that left the Ottomans reeling and Mustafa Kemal Atatürk fuming. Ah, Atatürk, the man who would rise from the ashes to lead the charge toward a new Turkish republic. If the Young Turks were the opening act, Atatürk was the headliner who came in and stole the show. A former Ottoman military officer, he wasn't about to let Sevres be the empire's final curtain call. In 1923, he and his fellow nationalists managed to renegotiate the terms with the Treaty of Lausanne, which recognized the boundaries of the modern Republic of Turkey. It was a victory that transformed Turkey into a secular nation-state, shedding the Ottoman legacy like an old coat. Atatürk's reforms were nothing short of revolutionary. He abolished the caliphate, introduced a new legal system, and even changed the Turkish alphabet from Arabic script to Latin. This wasn't just a leap forward, it was a pole vault. He was determined to drag Turkey into the modern world, kicking and screaming if necessary. But while his reforms set the stage for a new era, they also left behind a complex legacy. The rapid secularization and westernization were both applauded and criticized, viewed as either a bold new beginning or a reckless departure from tradition, depending on who you asked. So, what did the Ottomans get right? For one, their administrative and legal systems were ahead of their time, a model of efficiency and order in an era when many of their European counterparts were still figuring out how to govern without losing their heads, literally. The empire's emphasis on meritocracy, particularly through the Devshirme system, created a loyal and capable bureaucracy that kept the Ottoman machine running smoothly for centuries. On the flip side, the Ottomans struggled with modernization, often caught in a tug-of-war between tradition and progress. Their reluctance to fully embrace the Industrial Revolution left them lagging behind Europe, economically and militarily. The empire's ethnic and religious diversity, once a strength, became a liability as nationalist movements swept through Europe, tearing at the fabric of Ottoman society. But let's not forget the empire's lasting influence. The Ottomans left an indelible mark on architecture, art, and culture, with their legacy still visible in the mosques, palaces, and bazaars that dart modern-day Turkey and beyond. The Ottoman story is one of ambition and adaptation, of an empire that rose from a small Anatolian beylik to a formidable global power. Its decline serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the mightiest can fall when they lose sight of the changing tides. In the end, the Ottoman Empire saga is a rich tapestry of triumphs and tragedies, a story that continues to resonate in today's geopolitical landscape. As we close the book on this chapter of history, it's clear that the lessons of the Ottomans are as relevant now as ever. Whether it's the importance of adaptability, the perils of overextension, or the challenges of managing diversity, the empire's legacy offers insights that transcend time. So there you have it, the rise and fall of an empire that shaped the course of history, leaving behind a legacy that's both a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration. And as we bid farewell to the Ottomans, we can't help but wonder, what will future historians say about us? In the dead of night, while most of us are blissfully snuggled in our sheets dreaming of low-interest mortgages, medieval knights were busy planning how to knock down castle walls and make their enemies seriously regret the architectural decisions of their ancestors. Siege warfare in the Middle Ages wasn't just about brute force. It was a meticulous dance of logistics, physics, and quite frankly, a dash of insanity. Picture this. No, wait. I promise not to use clichés. Instead, think about a world where the trebuchet was the talk of the town, the rock star of medieval warfare, if you will. This mighty contraption could launch boulders the size of small cars over 300 meters away, and it wasn't just for the sake of showing off. When you needed to breach a castle wall, subtlety wasn't exactly on the agenda. Now, let's delve into the nuts and bolts, or should I say wood and iron, of these medieval mechanical marvels. Take the trebuchet, a machine that could hurl a 90-kilogram stone with the kind of disdain that only a particularly disgruntled medieval engineer could muster. It worked on the principle of a counterweight, swinging a long arm to fling projectiles with devastating force. It was the medieval equivalent of a bad breakup text. It hit hard, and it left a mark. But here's the kicker. Building one of these bad boys was no small feat. It required precision and resources. Think 15 tons of timber and several tons of iron just to get started. The sheer logistics of assembling a trebuchet could make a modern-day project manager break out in a cold sweat. And then there's the trusty battering ram, the medieval equivalent of a knock-knock joke with no punchline, just a splintered door. The battering ram was the champion of direct confrontation, a simple yet effective log suspended from chains and heavily reinforced with iron. It was the sledgehammer to the trebuchet's catapult. Less finesse, more raw determination. When you needed to get through a gate, this was your go-to. But don't underestimate its simplicity. The battering ram was the medieval multi-tool, capable of applying enough force to shatter even the sturdiest of gates. You didn't just roll up to a siege with one of these willy-nilly. A well-built ram could weigh upwards of a ton, and it often required a team of 20 or more men to operate. The logistical challenge of moving this beast to the front lines was not unlike trying to get a sofa bed through a narrow staircase. But why go to all this trouble? Surely there were easier ways to make enemies miserable. Medieval warfare was as much about economic pressure as it was about physical destruction. Well-placed siege could turn a thriving city into a ghost town faster than you could say tax evasion. The costs of maintaining a siege were astronomical. Historians estimate that the iron alone for a single catapult could weigh around 800 pounds. That's the equivalent of handing out iPads at a kindergarten. Expensive and likely to end in tears. The price of the iron and timber, along with the labor to build and operate these machines, meant that a siege was a serious investment. And like any good investment, it came with a risk. A failed siege could bankrupt a kingdom faster than a bad run on medieval crypto. So why did they do it? Because when it worked, the rewards were immense. Successful sieges meant control over territories, wealth, and power. Castles were the medieval version of a Swiss bank account. They held all the good stuff. Taking one meant you basically hit the jackpot, and who doesn't love a good payout? But the reality was far less romantic. Picture siege camps as bustling hives of disease, where dysentery was more feared than the enemy's arrows. The romantic notion of the medieval knight gallantly storming the castle often glosses over the grimmer reality of soldiers stuck in mud and muck for months on end, dreaming not of glory, but of a warm meal and a clean pair of socks. Amidst all this chaos, consider the medieval accountant, the unsung hero of siege warfare. Imagine trying to balance the books with the insane costs of maintaining an army, feeding thousands of men, and funding the construction of these elaborate machines of destruction. One wrong move, and you'd find yourself explaining to your liege why the treasury was emptier than a bar at closing time. It's no wonder medieval accountants had a tendency to disappear into the annals of history with little fanfare. They were the silent warriors, battling spreadsheets instead of enemies. And let's not forget the political chess game underpinning these military maneuvers. A siege wasn't just a physical battle. It was a strategic gamble with high stakes. Kings and lords had to weigh the pros and cons of deploying their forces, knowing full well that failure could lead to rebellion, or worse, an enemy counterattack. The social hierarchy meant that any misstep could drastically alter alliances, and the medieval world was nothing if not a breeding ground for Machiavellian schemes. So, the next time you walk by a medieval castle, remember the stories those stones could tell. Picture the trebuchets and battering rams, the engineers and soldiers, the accountants and kings, all playing their parts in the grand theatre of medieval siege warfare. It's a tale of ambition, ingenuity, and the occasional bout of lunacy, all in pursuit of power and prestige. The legends may paint a picture of chivalrous knights and noble battles, But the reality was often far more gritty and complex. And isn't that just the way with history? The truth, as always, is a little messier than the myth. Now, let's shift our gaze from the grand strategies and towering machines to the very human tales woven into the fabric of siege warfare. Picture those soldiers, not as faceless figures in chainmail, but as real individuals trudging through the muck, spears in hand, all the while wishing for a good pair of boots and a warm meal. Imagine standing knee-deep in mud for hours, surrounded by the clatter of weapons and the constant threat of attack. It wasn't all valiant charges and heroic stands. Most of the time, it was waiting, endless, mind-numbing waiting. And in that waiting, morale was as fragile as a soap bubble. These men weren't just fighting the enemy. They were battling the elements, boredom, and the creeping despair that came with every rain-soaked day. And what about the unfortunate souls caught inside those besieged castles? The locals who one day were tending gardens or selling their wares, only to find themselves suddenly penned in by walls that were meant to protect, but now felt like a suffocating cage. The psychological toll of a siege was immense. Imagine waking up to find your world reduced to the space within those stone walls, your freedom curtailed by the very fortress you once viewed as a sanctuary. Food supplies dwindled faster than a New Year's resolution, and the constant fear of assault turned every creak of the castle timbers into a potential omen of doom. This psychological warfare wasn't just a side effect, it was a strategy. Siege warfare was as much about breaking wills as it was about breaking walls. Commanders knew that a demoralized enemy was more likely to surrender, and they employed all sorts of tactics to erode the opponent's resolve. Take, for instance, the use of psychological tricks like taunting the defenders with the sight of relatives captured outside the walls, or the even darker tactic of catapulting diseased corpses over the ramparts to spread fear and plague. It was the medieval equivalent of a passive-aggressive email, but with considerably higher stakes. And let's not forget the defenders, those who turned every object at hand into a tool of survival. Necessity, as they say, is the mother of invention, and nowhere was this more evident than in a besieged castle. Everyday items became life-saving tools or weapons. Hot oil and boiling water weren't just for cooking. They became the last line of defense against climbers scaling the walls. Even beehives were weaponized, the buzzing missiles hurled at attackers with the hope that a cloud of furious bees might turn the tide. Talk about making the most of what you have. It's like a medieval MacGyver episode, only with less duct tape and more dire consequences. The siege of Château-Gaillard in 1204 is a prime example of this grim creativity. As the French forces closed in, the defenders resorted to desperate measures, using everything from lime powder to blinding attackers, to strategically collapsing parts of their own walls to block enemy advances. It was a tactical game of chess played with stone and sinew, where each move could mean the difference between life and death. And while the siege ultimately ended in defeat for the English, the ingenuity displayed by the defenders remains a testament to human resourcefulness under pressure. But let's not romanticize these acts of defiance too much. The reality for those besieged was often a slow descent into desperation. Starvation was a constant threat, and historical records tell of instances where inhabitants were forced to resort to eating rats, dogs, and even worse. The siege of Antioch during the First Crusade is notorious for its reports of cannibalism among the starving crusaders, a grim reminder that when survival is on the line, humanity's darker instincts can surface. Yet, amidst the grimness, there were moments of unexpected humanity. During the siege of Orleans in 1428-1429, a temporary truce was called to allow both sides to celebrate Christmas. Enemies who hours before had been trying to kill each other shared food and drink, a brief respite in the brutality of warfare. These instances, where the shared bonds of humanity transcended conflict, offer a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak narrative. While soldiers and civilians grappled with survival, the commanders played their own high-stakes game. For them, each siege was a calculated gamble, a test of endurance and strategy. Success could mean fame and fortune, while failure could lead to disgrace or even death. The infamous King John of England, known for his less-than-stellar reign, lost significant territories in France due to botched sieges, contributing to his eventual downfall and the birth of the Magna Carta. Siege warfare could make or break a ruler turning tides of power with the swing of a battering ram or the arc of a trebuchet. As we peel back the layers of legend and look at the gritty reality, it's clear that medieval siege warfare was far more than just a series of battles. It was a complex tapestry of human emotion, ingenuity, and endurance. The soldiers who stood in the mud and the civilians who huddled inside the walls lived through experiences that were as harrowing as they were formative. Every siege was a story of survival, innovation, and the indomitable spirit of those who, against all odds, found ways to endure. In the end, the history of sieges is not just a chronicle of conflict. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. As we continue to unravel these stories, it's clear that while the myths may capture our imaginations, the true tales of siege warfare reveal a much richer, if occasionally brutal, picture of our shared past. And as we dig deeper into these historical events, we'll find even more layers of intrigue and drama waiting to be uncovered. So, stay tuned as we explore the fascinating and often surprising world of medieval siege tactics and the people who lived through them. Just as we begin to delve into the labyrinthine political chess game that was medieval siege warfare, it's essential to understand that not every castle was a prime target. In fact, some were about as appealing to besiege as a soggy sandwich. The decision to lay siege was as much about politics as it was about warfare, with the strategic value of a castle often tied to the tangled web of alliances and the ever-volatile currency of loyalty. Picture this: a king standing over a map like it's a board game, deciding whether to move his pieces based on the potential payoff versus the risk of losing everything. Now, the medieval world wasn't just about brawn. It was a realm where brainpower played a pivotal role in determining who got to wear the fanciest crown. The worthiness of a siege wasn't just about the fortifications themselves, but their location, the resources they protected, and the message their capture would send. For instance, if you were eyeing a castle perched on a trade route, you were essentially gazing upon a gold mine. Capturing it meant a steady stream of tolls and taxes, the medieval equivalent of a golden goose. On the flip side, a castle in the middle of a desolate moor, not so much, unless you were really into sheep. The politics of siege warfare were a delicate dance, often dictated by alliances as fluid as a teenager's social calendar. One day, your neighbor could be your staunch ally, and the next, your arch-nemesis. Take the 100 Years' War, a historical soap opera if there ever was one. This conflict saw England and France swapping allegiances like they were trading cards, with castles frequently caught in the crossfire. And let's not forget the role of betrayal, that ever-reliable plot twist in the medieval drama. Switching sides could be as lucrative as it was dangerous. Just ask Robert of Artois, found himself exiled after trying to play both sides like a medieval double agent. Royal egos, too, played no small part in the decision-making process. Kings with something to prove were notorious for picking fights with the most fortified castles around, often more concerned with their legacy than the practicality of their endeavors. And let's be honest, nothing says, "I am a mighty king," quite like capturing an impregnable fortress. Consider Richard the Lionheart, who, despite his many military successes, couldn't resist the allure of a good siege, even if it meant leaving his kingdom vulnerable while he gallivanted off to the Holy Land. Talk about priorities. But behind every grand siege, there was an unsung hero or villain quietly pulling the strings: money. The economics of siege warfare were as complex as they were crucial. After all, you can't fund a war with goodwill alone. Armies needed to be paid, and siege engines didn't come cheap. To give you an idea of the financial stakes, the cost of maintaining a single knight could be as high as £6 per month, roughly $10,000 in today's money. Multiply that by an army of thousands, and you start to see why kings were often more worried about their coffers than their castles. In a world where money talked louder than any battering ram, the ability to fund a siege could make or break a campaign. A well-funded siege could drag on for months, wearing down defenders through starvation and attrition. On the other hand, a poorly financed one might collapse faster than a house of cards. Consider the Siege of Orleans, where the English, despite initial successes, found their campaign faltering due to dwindling resources and morale. The arrival of Joan of Arc with French reinforcements not only turned the tide militarily, but also served as a stark reminder that even the strongest army is vulnerable to the whims of fortune. And then there were the clever financial maneuvers that took place off the battlefield. Loans and levies became commonplace as kings scrambled to fund their campaigns. The infamous King John, for example, taxed his subjects to the brink of rebellion, a move that would ultimately cost him both his kingdom and his legacy. The Magna Carta, birthed from this financial overreach, stands as a testament to the lasting impact of economic desperation in shaping history. In this high-stakes game of siege warfare, the art of negotiation often proved as potent as the mightiest trebuchet. When the risk of a protracted siege loomed large, commanders would sometimes resort to diplomacy, offering terms of surrender in exchange for safe passage or favorable conditions. A castle's garrison might agree to open the gates rather than face the grim prospects of starvation or slaughter. This pragmatic approach was not without its own risks. A reputation for leniency could embolden other castles to resist longer, banking on the possibility of similar terms. Yet, the spectre of betrayal lurked ever present, with some defenders opting for subterfuge over surrender. The siege of Harlech Castle during the Wars of the Roses saw the garrison holding out for 7 long years, bolstered by clandestine supply lines and local support. Their resilience became legendary, a symbol of steadfast loyalty amidst a sea of shifting allegiances. As we navigate the labyrinth of medieval siege warfare, it becomes clear that it was not just a battle of weapons and walls, but of wits and wills. Every decision, whether made in the heat of battle or the quiet of strategy rooms, was a gamble with the potential to rewrite history. These sieges, with their towering machines and unyielding fortresses, were as much about human ambition as they were about military might. And as we continue to peel back the layers of this complex tapestry, we'll uncover more stories of intrigue, desperation, and the relentless pursuit of power that defined the medieval world. Stay tuned, because the next chapter is just heating up, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Siege warfare. The stuff of legends, right? The chivalrous knights, the gallant charges, the fair maidens watching anxiously from the parapets. Well, let's pump the brakes on that romanticized vision. Medieval sieges were less about honor and more about who could outlast whom in a grim game of attrition. In reality, the clash of swords and the shine of armor often gave way to something far less glamorous: muddy trenches and the pervasive stench of desperation. First, let's tackle the myth of chivalry. The idea that knights operated by a noble code during sieges was more PR stunt than reality. Sure, there was a code of conduct, but it was about as flexible as a yoga instructor. Knights were more concerned with plundering than poetry. For example, during the Siege of Acre in 1191, the English and French forces, supposedly fighting for Christendom, bickered like siblings over spoils and tactics. The real story of the siege was one of strategic calculation rather than romantic heroism. The knights were there for glory and loot, not some noble crusade. Now, let's talk about the supposed heroics. The image of a lone knight storming a castle wall is as appealing as it is misleading. The reality was more about patience and logistics than dashing charges. Sieges were won by those who could endure the longest, not the bravest. The art of waiting was as critical as the art of war. Picture this: an army sitting outside a castle for weeks, maybe months, hoping the defenders would run out of food before they ran out of patience. It was a battle of wills, not weapons. Speaking of patience, let's get into the nitty-gritty of life during a siege. If you think camping is rough, try doing it in a medieval siege camp. Hygiene was about as non-existent as a dragon in a Disney movie. Think mud, lots of it, and questionable hygiene choices. Bathing was rare. Many believed it was unhealthy, and the medical knowledge of the time was dubious at best. A splinter could lead to an infection that had you waving goodbye to your limbs faster than you could say antibiotics. The living conditions were less courtly romance and more post-apocalyptic survival. Soldiers lived in makeshift camps that were breeding grounds for diseases. Dysentery, typhoid, and other delightful ailments spread faster than gossip at a royal court. The Siege of Rouen in 1418 is a prime example. The English army sat outside the city for months, their camp becoming a veritable petri dish of disease. Conditions were so dire that the besieged city of Rouen resorted to expelling thousands of non-combatants to conserve food. only for them to be caught between the city walls and the enemy lines, left to starve. And while we're on the topic of food, or the lack thereof, let's talk about those inside the besieged walls. The romantic vision of castle life quickly crumbled under the harsh reality of a siege. As supplies dwindled, meals went from feasts to famine. Siege of Antioch during the First Crusade saw defenders boiling leather for sustenance. When push came to shove, even rats became a delicacy. Forget the grand banquets, survival was the only item on the menu. For the besiegers, supply lines were crucial. An army marched on its stomach, after all. King Edward I of England, during his campaign in Scotland, meticulously planned supply routes to ensure his troops were fed and ready. But even the best-laid plans could falter. A sudden storm could wipe out provisions, and local resources were often scarce. The besiegers had to improvise, sometimes foraging for food like medieval hunter-gatherers. The psychological toll of a siege was another grim reality. The constant threat of attack, the fear of starvation, and the sheer boredom could wear down even the most stalwart defender. Some commanders employed psychological warfare to break the enemy's spirit, taunting the defenders, blasting horns at all hours, or launching diseased animals over the walls were just some of the tactics used to sow despair. Even when the siege engines were silent, the threat of betrayal loomed large. Spies and turncoats were as much a part of siege warfare as catapults and battering rams. The siege of Constantinople in 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, famously ended not with a grand assault, but through treachery. A Venetian-led force found a way into the city, leading to its infamous sack. The outcome was less about chivalric combat and more about backdoor deals. And let's not forget the economic impact of a siege. The costs were astronomical, not just in terms of money, but in manpower and resources. A well-equipped army required funding, and a drawn-out siege could drain a kingdom's coffers faster than a tax collector on a sugar high. The Siege of Orleans in 1429, pivotal in the 100 Years' War, saw the English army stretched thin, their resources dwindling. Joan of Arc's arrival with French reinforcements turned the tide, but it was the economic strain that had already set the stage for their eventual defeat. So, while the legends may speak of valor and honor, the truth of medieval sieges is far less glamorous. It was a world of strategic patience, economic strain, and human endurance. The knights and soldiers were not just warriors, they were survivors, enduring the harsh realities of life and warfare. As we continue our exploration, we'll delve further into the complex tapestry of medieval sieges, uncovering more stories of ambition, survival, and human ingenuity. Hang tight, because the tale's not over yet, and trust me, it's about to get even more intriguing. And speaking of intrigue, let's look at how the echoes of medieval sieges thunder through the corridors of modern military strategy. You might think that the days of trebuchets and boiling oil are firmly lodged in the past, but the truth is, some of those archaic tactics have more staying power than a medieval bard's catchy tune. Take the concept of psychological warfare, for instance. During sieges, the art of messing with your enemy's head was as crucial as breaking down their walls. Fast forward to today, and you'll find similar mind games at play. The strategy of demoralizing the enemy is alive and well. Just ask anyone who's been on the receiving end of a misinformation campaign or a digital blitzkrieg. Now, let's talk about those absurd tactics that were so crazy they just had to work. Picture this: the Siege of Kaffa in 1346, where Mongol warriors catapulted plague-infested corpses over the city walls, inadvertently gifting the world the Black Death. Not exactly a hallmark moment, but it certainly left a mark. The idea of biological warfare might sound like the stuff of sci-fi, but its roots are as old as the hills. And while modern warfare has thankfully moved away from flinging infected bodies, the principle of using disease as a weapon has evolved into something far more sanitized and sinister. But it wasn't just about spreading disease. Sometimes the absurdity came in the form of sheer brute force. Consider the siege of Lisbon during the Second Crusade, where the besiegers offered to pay local musicians to play loudly, hoping to drive the defenders to distraction. It's hard to imagine heavy metal solos echoing through the ramparts, but hey, desperate times called for desperate measures. And while modern siege tactics have swapped out musical assaults for more advanced methods, the core idea, using every tool at your disposal to gain the upper hand, remains unchanged. These historical episodes have seeped into our cultural imagination, and nowhere is this more apparent than in movies and video games. Hollywood loves a good siege, and why not? They're dramatic, they're tense, and they offer a stage for both heroics and villainy. Whether it's the epic battles of The Lord of the Rings or the gritty realism of Game of Thrones, the influence of medieval siege warfare is undeniable. And if you've ever played a strategy game like Age of Empires or Total War, you've dipped your toes into the world of medieval tactics, albeit with a few more save points and a lot less dysentery. The fascination with sieges isn't just about the spectacle. It's about the timeless struggle of human ingenuity against seemingly insurmountable odds. It's the ultimate chess game, where the stakes are life and death, and every move counts. The lessons learned from these ancient conflicts continue to inform modern military strategy, from the importance of logistics to the psychological impact of warfare. It turns out that the past has a way of sticking around, like that one medieval tune you just can't get out of your head. So, as we wrap up our journey through the muddy trenches and towering battlements of medieval siege warfare, what's the takeaway? Beyond the trebuchets and the battering rams, the sieges of the Middle Ages were a testament to human resilience and creativity. They were a brutal reminder that warfare is as much about endurance as it is about aggression. The knights and soldiers who lived through these sieges were not just warriors. They were survivors who adapted to the harsh realities of their world. Sure, there's a romantic allure to the legends of chivalric combat and noble knights, but peel back the layers, and you find a story that's altogether more gritty and human. The truth is that history is rarely as neat as the myths we create around it. Medieval sieges were messy, chaotic, and filled with the kind of desperation that makes for great stories after the fact, but was probably less than fun to live through. In the end, the legacy of medieval sieges is not just about the castles taken or the battles won. It's about the enduring lessons of strategy, resilience, and the indomitable human spirit. These stories remind us that history is not just a series of events, but a reflection of who we are and who we aspire to be. So, next time you see a castle on a hill or fire up a strategy game, spare a thought for the real people who lived and fought through these extraordinary times. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that, while the weapons may change, the human spirit remains as unyielding as ever. And isn't that the most fascinating siege of all? In the bustling life of ancient Greece, where guards could turn you into a laurel tree just because they felt like it, Pottery was the silent, dependable hero none of us asked for but are glad existed. Every time someone in Athens lifted their morning wine with a slight headache from last night's symposium, they likely held an amphora, one of the many wondrous pieces of Greek pottery. Now, before you roll your eyes at the thought of ancient Tupperware, let's delve into why these ceramic pieces were far more than just ancient storage solutions. Ancient Greek pottery wasn't just about functionality, though it did excel at that. It was a visual diary, etched and painted with scenes of gods, heroes, and occasionally, the odd mortal who dared to do something memorable. These scenes were more riveting than the latest Netflix saga because they captured the stories, culture, and daily life of their makers in vivid detail. And while the Greeks didn't have TikTok, their pottery was a form of storytelling that lasted millennia longer than any viral dance challenge. Let's talk types, because in ancient Greece, one size did not fit all. There were amphorae, those elegant vessels with two handles and a long neck, perfect for storing wine and oil. Then you had craters, the mixing bowls of the gods, used for diluting wine with water. How pragmatic, considering pure wine could knock a Spartan out faster than a Persian arrow. And don't forget kylixes, the shallow cups that made drinking a delicate art. The Greeks had a part for every occasion, because why not be extra when you can? Now, how did these pieces come to be? Imagine pottery workshops, not unlike the artisanal studios of today, but with more olive oil and fewer hipsters. The process was labor-intensive and required a serious team effort. First, there was the clay. Attic clay from Athens was the rock star, famous for its rich, orange-red color after firing. It was like the celebrity influencer of clays, and everyone wanted a piece. Corinthian clay wasn't too shabby either, offering a lighter, creamier palette. Crafting pottery was no solo act. It involved a team of skilled artisans, each with a specific role. The potter would shape and mold the clay on a wheel, a process that didn't exactly scream easy breezy. Once shaped, The vase was handed off to a painter who would sketch designs with slip, a mix of water and clay. Talk about pressure. One wrong brushstroke, and the whole thing could end up looking like a toddler's art project. After painting, the pottery was fired in a kiln at temperatures over 900 degrees C, which is the kind of heat that makes Greek summers seem like a mild breeze. So why did pottery matter so much? Well, it was the ancient Greek version of Instagram. It documented everything from epic battles to the mundane joy of a symposium. Economically, it was a big deal too. Pottery was a significant export, with Athens and Corinth leading the charge. Athenian pottery, in particular, was shipped all over the Mediterranean, spreading Greek culture like a well-aimed catapult. The revenue from pottery trade was substantial, enough to keep the city-states in a comfortable state of competition or cooperation, depending on the day. As for the economics, let's break it down. The cost of raw materials like clay was fairly low, but the skill and labor involved bumped up the price. A single amphora could take days to complete, with the price reflecting the craftsmanship involved. Pottery centers like Athens and Corinth were buzzing hives of activity, with workers churning out vases faster than you could say Euripides. But let's not get too carried away by the romanticism of it all. Pottery production was hard work, and workshops were likely hot, crowded, and smelled like a mixture of wet clay and sweat. The laborers weren't exactly living the high life. They were more like the unsung heroes behind the scenes, ensuring every Greek household and temple could boast a collection of stylish amphorae and craters. In short, ancient Greek pottery was a blend of art, utility, and economic strategy. It was the silent observer of a civilization that revered its gods, debated philosophy, and occasionally indulged in a little too much wine. So, the next time you sip from a cup, spare a thought for those ancient artisans who carved out a legacy one clay vessel at a time. It might just make your drink taste that much sweeter, or at least more historically significant. Speaking of legacy, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Greek pottery's artistic flair, the kind that makes you want to rethink your own dining set. We're talking about the iconic black figure and red figure techniques, the ancient equivalents of HD and 4K in the world of ceramics. These methods weren't just about painting pretty pictures. They were the streaming platforms of ancient Greece, broadcasting cultural and political tales straight from the kiln. First up, the black figure technique. Picture this. It's around 700 BC, and artists are painting with slip, a liquid clay, onto vases that would turn black during firing. The scenes they depicted weren't just your average stick figure doodles. Oh no, these were intricate designs featuring mythological heroes, guards battling it out, and the occasional banquet scene complete with tipsy satyrs. The figures were etched out with a sharp tool, revealing the red of the clay beneath. This technique was the height of sophistication until, like a plot twist, someone decided that negative space was totally underrated. Enter the red figure technique. Around 530 BC, in a fit of artistic rebellion, Greek potters flipped the script. Instead of black figures on a red background, they switched to red figures on a black background. This allowed for more detailed and fluid lines, giving the artists a chance to flex their creative muscles. You could almost say it was the ancient version of switching from vinyl to digital. This method took off like a wildfire, and soon every pottery workshop in Athens was cranking out red figure masterpieces faster than you could say Homer. But let's not get too starry-eyed about the artistry without acknowledging the unsung heroes behind these masterpieces. The potters and painters, often anonymous, were the true craftsmen here. These artisans worked tirelessly, their names rarely etched into the annals of history, much like the studio engineers behind a hit song. Their task was not just to create a functional item, but to ensure it told a story, one that often reflected the social and political climate of the time. Take the famous Euphronios crater, for example. Created by the potter Euphronios and painter Euxithios, this red figure crater is a testament to the skill and artistry of its creators. It depicts the death of Sarpedon, a scene from the Iliad, capturing both the tragedy and drama of war. This wasn't just a pretty part. It was a canvas for storytelling, a commentary on the human condition. And let's not forget the economic side. These pieces were highly valued commodities. In today's terms, owning one would be like having a Banksy on your wall. But what about the tales these parts told? Well, they were a mixed bag. much like your current Netflix queue. You had your mythological epics featuring gods and heroes, sure, but also scenes of everyday life, banquets, athletic competitions, and even the occasional risque rendezvous. Pottery was a way for the Greeks to celebrate their cultural identity, to immortalize their beliefs, and to pass on political messages. It was as much about propaganda as it was about aesthetics. And let's talk economics for a moment. The potters and painters might not have been rolling in drachmas, but their work was crucial to the economy. Pottery was a major export, with Athens leading the charge. The city-state's pottery, with its distinctive red color and artistic designs, was shipped all over the Mediterranean. The trade of these vessels was a source of wealth and influence, helping Athens maintain its position as a cultural and economic powerhouse. Of course, not every part told a story of grandeur. Some depicted the harsh realities of life, such as the struggles of war or the drudgery of labor. These were the ancient Greek equivalent of a gritty documentary, peeling back the layers of society to reveal the truth beneath. And while we may romanticize these images now, let's remember that they depicted a world where life was often brutal and short. So, the next time you admire a piece of Greek pottery, remember the hands that crafted it, the stories it tells, and the role it played in shaping history. It's a legacy that endured not because of its beauty alone, but because it captured the essence of a civilization that was as flawed as it was fascinating. Stay tuned, as we'll continue to unravel more tales from the clay archives in the next part of our journey through ancient Greek pottery. As we sail into the next chapter of our Greek pottery adventure, let's throw our anchor into the choppy waters of trade, an ancient world marketplace where Greek pottery was the hot ticket item, as coveted as the latest smartphone. These ceramic beauties were more than just household essentials. They were the cultural ambassadors of Greece, spreading like wildfire across the Mediterranean. So how did these parts make their way from the workshops of Athens and Corinth to the far-flung corners of the ancient world? First, let's talk transportation. In an era where FedEx wasn't even a glimmer in Hermes' eye, getting pottery from point A to point B was a feat worthy of a Herculean legend. Greek potters relied on a vast network of trade routes, both overland and maritime, that crisscrossed the known world. Picture bustling ports like Piraeus, where amphorae were loaded onto ships alongside olive oil and wine, setting sail for distant lands. These vessels weren't exactly luxury liners. They were more akin to floating IKEA warehouses, packed to the gills with pottery that somehow survived the journey without a single bubble wrap in sight. The reach of Greek pottery was impressive, to say the least. From the bustling marketplaces of Egypt to the palatial courts of Etruria, these vessels were in high demand. By the 6th century BC, Athenian pottery had become the collector's item du jour from Spain to Syria. It was as if every Mediterranean port had its own little piece of Athens, complete with scenes of Dionysian revelry or heroic battles etched into their surfaces. This wasn't just trade. It was cultural diffusion on a grand scale. But before we get too misty-eyed about the romanticism of trade, let's add a splash of reality to our narrative. You see, the Mediterranean was not just a serene blue expanse dotted with sailboats and friendly traders. It was also a cauldron of conflict, a salty battleground where piracy and trade wars made naval travel an adventure worthy of an Odyssey sequel. Pirates, those ancient entrepreneurs of the high seas, were an ever-present threat. They didn't just plunder for gold. Pottery was a lucrative score, too. A single amphora could fetch a handsome price, making it a tempting target for these maritime marauders. And let's not forget the city-states themselves, who weren't above a little naval skirmish to secure trade routes. Athens, the darling of Greek pottery, was no stranger to flexing its maritime muscles. Control of the sea lanes meant control of commerce, and Athens was determined to keep its pottery empire afloat, metaphorically and literally. Athenian fleets patrolled the waters, protecting their precious cargoes from both pirates and rival nations, because when it came to pottery, all's fair in love and trade wars. Now, let's dig a little deeper into the economic impact of this pottery trade. For the bustling city-state of Athens, exporting pottery was like striking oil. The revenue generated from these clay masterpieces was substantial, enough to fuel the Athenian economy and fund public works projects that would make even the most ambitious city planner blush. We're talking about the construction of grand temples, the maintenance of public spaces, and the sponsorship of cultural events. Pottery wasn't just an art form, it was a cornerstone of economic stability and civic pride. The economic ripple effect extended beyond the potters themselves. Think of the merchants and sailors who transported these goods, the market vendors who sold them, and the consumers who used them daily. This vast network of individuals benefited from the pottery trade, creating a symbiotic relationship that supported the Athenian way of life. In essence, Greek pottery wasn't just a commodity, it was a lifeline, binding the city-state to the wider world. But as with any booming industry, there were winners and losers. While the potters of Athens might have basked in the glory of their international reputation, the laborers who toiled in the workshops saw little of the economic windfall. They were the unsung heroes, working long hours in stifling conditions, their names lost to history. It was a tale as old as time, the rich getting richer, while the workers remained cogs in the wheel of progress. And here's a nugget of irony for you. The very success of Athenian pottery led to its downfall. As these vessels flooded foreign markets, local potteries in places like Etruria began to mimic the styles and techniques of their Greek counterparts. The Etruscans, ever the opportunists, saw an emerging market and pounced. By the 4th century BC, they had developed their own thriving pottery industry, producing local variants that rivaled and eventually surpassed the popularity of Greek imports. So, while the Greeks were busy patting themselves on the back for their artistic prowess, their cultural exports were being co-opted and adapted by others. It was a classic case of imitation as the sincerest form of flattery, but one that diluted the dominance of Greek pottery in the Mediterranean market. And thus, we see the dual nature of trade, both a bridge and a battleground. It connected people across vast distances, spreading culture and ideas, but also sparked competition and conflict. The story of Greek pottery is a testament to this complexity, a reminder that every beautifully painted kylix or amphora carries with it the weight of history, both glorious and grim. As we wrap up this leg of our journey, remember that Greek pottery was more than just clay and paint. It was a symbol of artistic achievement, a tool of economic power, and a catalyst for cultural exchange. And while we've only scratched the surface, there's plenty more to uncover in the tale of these ancient artifacts. In our next installment, we'll dive even deeper into the stories that these parts tell, the lives they touched, and the legacy they left behind. So, stay tuned, because the kiln is far from cool, and the narrative is just heating up. As we prepare to navigate the intricate labyrinth of Greek life beyond mere trade, let's pull back the curtain on how pottery was woven into the very fabric of ancient society. We're talking Greek symposiums and religious ceremonies, events where these ceramic wonders weren't just passive observers, but active participants. Picture this: pottery is the ancient equivalent of your smartphone at a party, indispensable, multifunctional, and occasionally the source of embarrassing stories. Symposiums in ancient Greece were the social media platforms of their day, but instead of hashtags and selfies, they had wine and philosophical debates. These all-male gatherings were where the intellectual elite, much like the influencers of today, shaped opinions and shared ideas. And guess who played the role of the silent enabler? That's right, pottery. The crater, an essential fixture at these gatherings, was the life of the party. It was here that wine was mixed with water, a practical necessity in an era where straight wine was as potent as a politician's promise. But pottery wasn't just about keeping the wine flowing. It was a canvas for political propaganda. The scenes painted on symposium was often depicted mythological narratives or historical events, subtly reinforcing the ideologies of those in power. Athenian politicians knew the power of a good story, and they used pottery to craft narratives that aligned with their agendas. It was ancient PR at its finest, a visual campaign to sway public opinion with every sip of diluted wine. Now, let's talk numbers. A crater could hold up to 45 liters of liquid, which sounds like a frat party in the making. But the Greeks, ever the connoisseurs, believed in moderation. The wine-water ratio was key, usually around 1:3, because nobody wanted a room full of orators turned drunken sailors. The pottery itself wasn't just decorative, it was a reflection of the host's status. The more intricate and artistically significant the piece, the higher the social standing of its owner. It was the ancient equivalent of boasting a limited edition designer handbag or a custom sports car. proof that some things never change. Religious ceremonies, on the other hand, were where pottery took on a more solemn role. These events were the spiritual heartbeats of Greek life, moments when mortals sought to appease the gods with offerings and rituals. Pottery was there, ever reliable, as the vessel for libations and sacrifices. The iconic amphorae were often used to store sacred oils or wines, their painted surfaces depicting scenes of divine myths meant to curry favor with the pantheon. Imagine a priest pouring out a libation to Zeus, the liquid cascading from a meticulously crafted amphora, each brushstroke a prayer for divine intervention. But let's not romanticize these religious events too much. They were as much about power and control as they were about piety. The priesthood, often drawn from the elite, wielded significant influence, and pottery was a tool in their arsenal. The images on these sacred vessels weren't just religious. They were political statements, reinforcing the status quo and ensuring that the gods were conveniently aligned with the interests of those in charge. Now, let's debunk a myth: the idea that ancient Greek democracy was a paragon of equality and fairness. While Athens is celebrated as the cradle of democracy, it was more of a toddler learning to walk than a mature adult. Pottery, with its political iconography, reveals the less glamorous side of this fledgling system. Scenes etched into clay sometimes depicted the harsh realities of Athenian politics. Ostracism, voting, and public shaming were as much a part of the democratic process as they were a spectacle for the masses. These vases were the tabloids of their time, broadcasting the triumphs and scandals of the day. Pottery also played a role in the education of Greek citizens. Young men, the future voters and soldiers, learned about their cultural heritage and civic duties through the images on their everyday ceramics. A kylix depicting Theseus slaying the Minotaur wasn't just a pretty picture. It was a lesson in valor and civic responsibility. It was a reminder that, in the ideal Greek city-state, courage and cunning were as valued as democracy itself. The economic implications of pottery in these social and political spheres were profound. Pottery production was a well-oiled machine, with workshops churning out pieces for both domestic use and export. The demand for high-quality ceramics in symposiums and religious ceremonies ensured a steady income for potters, painters, and the merchants who sold their wares. This wasn't just art. It was an industry, one that supported a vast network of workers and bolstered the Athenian economy. But let's not forget the human cost of this economic engine. The laborers in the pottery workshops, the unsung artisans whose hands crafted beauty from clay, toiled in conditions that were far from idyllic. These were the blue-collar workers of their time, their hard work fueling a cultural legacy that they could never fully partake in. It was a tale as old as time, art as a commodity, with the profits flowing upwards while the creators remained in the shadows. In examining the social and political significance of pottery, we see a microcosm of Greek society itself, a blend of beauty and brutality, of high ideals and harsh realities. Pottery was both a mirror and a magnifying glass, reflecting societal values while exposing the cracks beneath the surface. It was a tool for storytelling, for propaganda, and for maintaining the delicate balance of power in a world where democracy was still finding its footing. As we continue our journey through the clay-stained corridors of history, remember that every part tells a story, not just of the people who made and used it, but of the society that shaped its creation. Pottery was more than just a vessel. It was a testament to the complexities of human nature, a reminder that even in the ancient world, the line between art and life was as fluid as the wine within a crater. Stay tuned, because the kiln of history still has more secrets to reveal, and the story of Greek pottery is far from over. As we unearth the final shards of our Greek pottery tale, let's pause to assess the legacy these humble vessels have left in their wake. Greek pottery wasn't just a snapshot of ancient life. It was a cultural phenomenon that transcended time and space, influencing everything from Roman art to modern archaeology. It's as if these ceramic time capsules were whispering stories to anyone patient enough to listen, sharing secrets about human creativity and the timeless dance of cultural exchange. First, let's acknowledge how Greek pottery laid the groundwork for later cultures, particularly the Romans. While the Romans may have had a penchant for grandiosity, think larger-than-life statues and opulent villas, they couldn't resist the allure of Greek aesthetics. Roman pottery, especially during the Republic and early Empire, borrowed heavily from Greek styles, adapting their forms and sometimes straight-up copying their motifs. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, understood that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So they took what was already a hit in Greece and gave it their own spin. This cultural borrowing was less about imitation and more about admiration, a nod to the Greeks' artistic genius. But the legacy of Greek pottery goes beyond mere aesthetic influence. Fast forward to the modern age, and you'll find that these ancient ceramics have become the darlings of archaeology. Pottery shards, or sherds, if you're feeling fancy, are among the most common finds at archaeological sites. They're like breadcrumbs leading us through the labyrinth of history, offering tantalizing glimpses into ancient economies, trade networks, and daily life. You see, pottery is a sturdy survivor, outlasting the fragile remnants of other materials. It's the cockroach of the archaeological world, enduring through centuries to tell its tales. Consider the economic impact these finds reveal. Pottery fragments discovered in far-flung locales paint a picture of a bustling trade network that connected the Greeks to distant lands. Each sherd is a testament to the vast reach of Greek commerce, highlighting how these ceramic containers were not just vessels of wine or oil, but carriers of culture and influence. Archaeologists can trace trade routes, study shifts in economic power, and understand cultural exchanges through the distribution of pottery styles across the Mediterranean. It's like piecing together an ancient jigsaw puzzle, with every fragment offering a crucial piece of the bigger picture. Now, let's address the myths versus the reality of ancient Greek life as depicted through pottery. There's a romantic notion that the Greeks were all about beauty, wisdom, and democracy, a society of toga-wearing philosophers sipping wine under olive trees. While there's a kernel of truth in this idyllic image, the reality was far more complex, and pottery reveals as much. The scenes painted on these ceramics often depict not just triumphs and heroics, but also the darker sides of life: wars, slavery, and political intrigue. It's a reminder that Greek society, like any other, wrestled with its own set of challenges and contradictions. Take, for example, the myth of Greek democracy as a bastion of equality. Pottery from the era tells a different story. The political imagery, often found on symposium wares, reveals a society grappling with issues of power and privilege. Ostracism, a practice where citizens could vote to exile an individual, is depicted on some pottery pieces, illustrating the precarious nature of political life in Athens. It was democracy, yes, but with an edge, where public opinion could be as fickle as a cat with a laser pointer. In essence, Greek pottery serves as both a mirror and a magnifying glass, a reflection of the ideals Greeks aspired to and a magnification of the realities they faced. These ceramic chronicles remind us that human nature is a tapestry woven with threads of both nobility and frailty. The Greeks, like us, were a mix of brilliance and blunder, capable of both inspiring art and petty politics. So, what can ancient Greek pottery teach us about human creativity and cultural exchange? For one, it's a testament to humanity's relentless drive to create, to express, and to connect. The artisans who crafted these parts weren't just making functional items. They were storytellers, capturing the essence of their time in clay. Their work transcended borders and centuries, influencing cultures and igniting imaginations long after they themselves had faded into history. Moreover, Greek pottery highlights the importance of cultural exchange in shaping civilizations. The Greeks borrowed motifs and techniques from their neighbors, just as others would later borrow from them. This cross-pollination of ideas fueled artistic innovation and economic prosperity, proving that cultures thrive not in isolation, but through interaction and adaptation. Finally, let's leave you with a punchy observation. Greek pottery, despite its ancient origins, remains a relevant reminder of what it means to be human. These vessels, born from the earth and shaped by skilled hands, carry with them stories of triumph and tragedy, creativity and commerce. They are a testament to the enduring spirit of exploration and expression, a reminder that even in our modern world, the past still has much to teach us, if only we're willing to listen. And there you have it, a journey through the world of ancient Greek pottery, from its humble beginnings to its lasting legacy. So, next time you're sipping from a cup or admiring a piece of art, take a moment to think of those ancient artisans who, with clay and creativity, left behind a legacy that continues to shape our understanding of history and humanity. On a stormy night, in the humble village of Smiljan, Croatia, a baby named Nikola Tesla decided to make his grand entrance into the world with a flair for the dramatic. It was July 10, 1856, and according to family legend, lightning split the sky just as he was born, prompting the midwife to declare him a child of the storm. His mother, Georgina Tesla, a lady with a penchant for inventing small household gadgets, probably just rolled her eyes. After all, she had her hands full with other children and a husband, Milutin, who was both a priest and a writer, a real jack-of-all-trades in a time when multitasking wasn't an advertised skill on LinkedIn. Now, if there was one thing young Tesla had in spades, it was curiosity. Not the kind of curiosity satisfied by asking why the sky is blue, but the sort that needed to know what electricity tastes like. One pivotal event in his early years involved a cat named Makak. As the story goes, Tesla was petting Makak one cold, dry day when his fingers unleashed a static shock that sparked his lifelong obsession with electricity. Unlike most kids who would simply get a new haircut from the resulting frizz, Tesla saw potential. He reportedly asked his father if nature was one big cat and static electricity, its endless fur. It was a question that only a future scientific genius could ask without sounding like they'd been sniffing too much glue. Tesla's family, with their mix of ecclesiastical duties and a DIY approach to life, clearly left a mark on him. His mother, though lacking formal education, was a brilliant inventor in her own right, crafting tools and devices to make life easier around the house. Perhaps she was the original life hacker, long before the internet was a twinkle in anyone's eye. Milutin, on the other hand, wanted Nikola to follow in his footsteps and become a priest. But the only kind of communion Tesla was interested in involved electrons, not sermons. As Tesla grew, so did his restless intellect. He read voraciously, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. He battled with illness during his teenage years, which left him bedridden. Rather than let his mind rust, he used this time to delve into the realms of science and engineering, dreaming up inventions that would have probably worried the neighbors, had they known. He was a classic overachiever, the kind of student who'd ruin the curve for everyone else, but in a way that made them all begrudgingly admire him. Fast forward to 1875, and Tesla found himself at the Austrian Polytechnic in Graz. This was the place where his intellectual prowess truly shone, and where he discovered the joys of gambling. The man was a whiz at mathematics, capable of performing complex calculations in his head faster than you could say, integrated circuit. But what goes up must come down, and Tesla's other addiction led to all sorts of financial drama. He gambled away his allowance, his friends' money, and probably the shirt off his back if it weren't for the fact that he only ever owned a handful of suits. The Austrian Polytechnic was also where Tesla first clashed with authority. His professors reportedly didn't know what to do with him. He was the student who would correct them during lectures, much to their chagrin. Tesla's passion for electricity was so intense that he often worked 20-hour days, leaving little time for anything else. He became so engrossed in his studies that he forgot to sleep, eat, or occasionally remember the existence of the outside world. This was a man who, when asked about his dietary habits, claimed to survive on just a couple of hours of rest and a devout belief in the power of milk. If only he knew about energy drinks. Despite his academic prowess, Tesla's university career was a roller coaster ride, one that ultimately ended with him dropping out. The official story was that he lost his scholarship due to gambling, but considering his tendency to push boundaries, it's a wonder he lasted as long as he did. The Austrian Polytechnic was just the opening salvo in a life that would be as electrifying as it was erratic. So, what did we learn about young Nikola Tesla? He was a prodigy with a penchant for pushing buttons, both literal and metaphorical. A gambler with a mind sharper than a lightning bolt, and a dreamer with visions of a world transformed by electricity. His early years were a mix of genius-level curiosity and the kind of youthful indiscretions that make for the best stories. Tesla, even in his formative years, was the kind of person who wouldn't just ask if the glass was half full or half empty. He'd be the one to invent a new type of glass entirely. And so, with a penchant for invention, and a head full of electrifying dreams. Nikola Tesla found himself at a crossroads. His education at the Austrian Polytechnic had been a mix of brilliance and recklessness, much like his own life. But Tesla was no stranger to reinvention. Fast forward to 1884, and he's on a steamer to the United States, clutching a letter of recommendation and a whopping 4 cents. Yes, you heard that right. 4 cents. Not exactly the grand fortune you'd want when stepping onto the shores of opportunity. But hey, maybe he thought he could charge it to experience. Tesla's ticket to the New World was more than a physical journey. It was a leap of faith. He arrived in New York City, a place pulsing with the kind of energy that only the late 19th century could muster. The Statue of Liberty had just been dedicated the previous year, a beacon of hope for immigrants like Tesla. But let's be real. Lady Liberty wasn't going to pay the rent. Enter Thomas Edison, a man whose name was synonymous with the electric age. Edison was already a household fixture thanks to his incandescent light bulb, and Tesla saw in him both a mentor and a challenge. Their initial meeting was probably what you'd expect from two titans in the making, awkward, full of potential, and ultimately a prelude to one of the most famous rivalries in scientific history. Edison was the kind of boss who loved practical solutions, and Tesla, well, he was all about theoretical innovation. The two were like oil and water, except with more sparks and patent filings. Soon, Tesla was working for Edison, tasked with improving the company's direct current, DC, generators. Now, here's where it gets juicy. Edison allegedly promised Tesla $50,000 if he could make his DC generators more efficient. Tesla, being the overachiever we know him to be, accepted the challenge with the kind of enthusiasm that makes you wonder if he heard the offer right. Spoiler alert, he did, but Edison had other ideas. After Tesla completed the task, Edison reportedly laughed it off, saying something to the effect of "You don't understand our American humor." Ouch! That $50,000 in today's money will be more than $1 million, enough to buy a lifetime supply of light bulbs, and then some. Tesla, understandably miffed, quit. But let's not cry too much for our inventor hero. If anything, this setback was the spark, pun intended, that ignited his lifelong crusade for alternating current, AC, technology. Unlike Edison's DC, which required power stations every mile or so, AC could be transmitted over long distances without losing efficiency. It was Tesla's answer to the urban sprawl and burgeoning industrial demands of the age. This was the beginning of the infamous War of Currents. Edison, ever the showman, embarked on a campaign to discredit AC by highlighting its dangers, even going so far as to electrocute animals publicly to prove his point. It was a brutal PR strategy, and you'd be forgiven for thinking Edison was auditioning for a role in a horror film. Tesla, on the other hand, doubled down on the technical merits of AC, aligning himself with George Westinghouse, a savvy businessman who saw the future in Tesla's vision. Westinghouse, with his entrepreneurial spirit, backed Tesla's alternating current with gusto. He bought Tesla's patents for $60,000 in cash and stock, plus a royalty of $2.50 per horsepower generated by his AC system. Financially speaking, it was a lifeline thrown to Tesla at just the right moment. And boy, did Tesla deliver. Together, they lit up the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, showcasing AC's potential to power large cities, while Edison was busy frying elephants. Yes, really, look up poor Topsy. Tesla and Westinghouse were proving AC's practicality and safety. The Niagara Falls Power Project became their crowning achievement, harnessing the natural power of the falls to generate electricity. It was a triumph of engineering and a decisive win in the battle of electrical currents. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't just about electricity. It was about the future of technology, the economy, and most importantly, who would control it. The economic context here was crucial. The late 19th century was a time of rapid industrialization, with cities like New York and Chicago expanding at breakneck speed. Whoever controlled electrical power would effectively hold the keys to the kingdom. The stakes were sky high, literally, as skyscrapers began to pierce the skyline. This was the era of the Gilded Age, a time when fortunes were made and lost almost overnight. Tesla's alternating current was the linchpin in this economic revolution. It allowed factories to operate more efficiently, homes to be lit more affordably, and cities to grow vertically as well as horizontally. It was the internet of its day, transforming society in ways people could hardly fathom. But let's not forget the flip side. Behind the romantic image of a genius inventor stood harsh realities, financial struggles, patent disputes, and a world not quite ready to catch up with his visionary ideas. So, as the dust settled from the War of Currents, Tesla found himself both a victor and a victim of his own success. The world was electrified, but Tesla's personal fortunes were anything but stable. He was a man of contradictions, brilliant yet impractical, visionary yet often blind to the immediate needs of business. His life, like his inventions, was a high-voltage drama that continues to fascinate and inspire. And there we leave Tesla for now, standing at the precipice of his next great adventure, with both triumphs and trials ahead. The story of Nikola Tesla is far from over. Like any great saga, it is filled with twists and turns that defy easy explanations. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the enigmatic life of this electrical wonderkind, where genius meets melancholy and ambition dances with adversity. Tesla stood on the brink of the 20th century, a man whose life crackled with potential energy, much like one of his own inventions. The 1890s were his playground, and he was about to make the most of it. This was peak Tesla, both in terms of his innovations and his quirks. You could say he was the Kanye West of his day, brilliant, eccentric, and always a headline waiting to happen. Let's start with the technical fireworks. The Tesla coil, unveiled in 1891, was a high-voltage creation that could produce electrical discharges resembling lightning. It was a marvel of engineering, the kind of thing that made people gasp and kids dream of being inventors. Imagine being in the audience as Tesla demonstrated his coil, arcs of electricity dancing in the air like some kind of avant-garde light show. The coil wasn't just a party trick, though. It was a stepping stone to wireless communication, a concept as mind-blowing then as teleportation would be today. Tesla envisioned a world where information and electricity could be transmitted without wires. In case you're wondering, this was a time when the majority of people were still getting used to the idea of electric light, never mind invisible signals flying through the air. Yet Tesla was already sketching out the future we now take for granted, a wireless world powered by radio waves. He even filed the first patents for radio technology in the late 1890, before our dear friend Guglielmo Marconi swooped in with his own claims. Spoiler, Marconi got the glory, but Tesla eventually got the credit, albeit posthumously, thanks to a 1943 Supreme Court ruling that recognized his contributions to radio technology. But while Tesla was electrifying the world, he was also becoming its favorite mad scientist. It wasn't just the science that got tongues wagging, it was the man himself. Tesla was an enigma wrapped in a riddle wrapped in a very sharply tailored suit. He claimed to sleep only 2 hours a night, yet maintained a work schedule that would put a Silicon Valley startup to shame. Add to that his germophobia, his obsession with the number 3, and his penchant for feeding New York City pigeons, and you've got yourself a character worthy of a steampunk novel. Ah, the pigeons. Let's not fly past that one. Tesla reportedly spent hours in Bryant Park, feeding and observing the birds. He even claimed that a particular white pigeon visited him daily, and he loved this bird as he would a human companion. In a city known for its hard-nosed pragmatism, Tesla was king of the eccentrics, the guy who made the tabloids for his feathered friendships as often as for his technological feats. Speaking of which, the media played a massive role in shaping Tesla's public image. Newspapers of the day were quick to label him a genius, but just as quick to sensationalize his quirks. They painted him as a brilliant recluse, a wizard of electricity who could command lightning but couldn't quite grasp the concept of a balanced checkbook. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between. Tesla was indeed a genius, but he was also a man who struggled with the practicalities of life, like managing finances, or, remembering to eat. The economic backdrop of Tesla's peak years was a mixed bag. On one hand, he was the toast of the town, dining with the elite and rubbing elbows with the likes of Mark Twain. On the other, he was constantly teetering on the edge of financial ruin. Despite the lucrative patents and the backing of investors like J.P. Morgan, Tesla's projects often ran over budget. His grandest dream, the Wardenclyffe Tower, was intended to be a global wireless transmission station, but it ended up as a monumental money pit. The tower was never completed, becoming instead a symbol of both Tesla's ambition and his tragic inability to navigate the treacherous waters of early 20th century capitalism. So while Tesla was busy lighting up the world, he was also learning that the business of invention was as much about dollars and cents as it was about volts and watts. His insistence on pursuing visionary ideas, regardless of practical constraints, was both his greatest strength and his Achilles heel. He was a man out of time in a world obsessed with the bottom line. Yet, even as financial woes loomed, Tesla's reputation as a scientific rock star remained intact. The media loved a good story, and Tesla provided plenty. Journalists couldn't resist his blend of genius and oddity, painting him as a modern-day Prometheus whose fire was both literal and metaphorical. It was this image that endured, even as the reality of his life grew more complex. As the 1900s dawned, Tesla's focus shifted increasingly towards wireless communication. He dreamed of a global network of information, a proto-internet, if you will. But while he was imagining smartphones before smartphones were a twinkle in anyone's eye, the world was moving on. New technologies, new players, and new economic realities were emerging, and Tesla's influence was beginning to wane. His reputation as a mad scientist, however, was firmly cemented. Even as Tesla's career entered a period of decline, his story wasn't over. He continued to invent, to dream, and of course to feed pigeons. His later years were marked by both personal and professional challenges, but also by a legacy that would outlive him. In the end, Tesla was a man who dared to dream big, sometimes too big for his own good, and in doing so, he changed the world. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's more to Tesla's tale, more twists and turns in the saga of this electric visionary. As we leave him now, he's on the cusp of a new century, his mind still buzzing with ideas, his heart still beating to the rhythm of innovation. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the enigma that is Nikola Tesla, a man whose life was as electrifying as his inventions. As we pick up the thread of Tesla's story, it's clear that his future was as unpredictable as one of his own lightning shows. The 20th century was dawning, but for Tesla, it wasn't exactly a bright new morning. The man who had electrified the world was now facing the harsh reality of a career that was beginning to flicker like a faulty bulb. Tesla's later years, despite the brilliance of his mind, were a financial train wreck. He had amassed an impressive portfolio of over 300 patents, a number that could have easily set him up for life. Yet here he was, struggling to keep the lights on, literally. It's the kind of irony that would make a Greek tragedian weep. For all his genius, Tesla was as adept at handling money as a cat is at swimming. Let's zoom in on the Wardenclyffe Tower, Tesla's piece de resistance, or at least it was supposed to be. This massive, 187-foot structure on Long Island was meant to be the world's first wireless transmission station, a beacon of innovation that would transmit electricity and information across the globe without a single cable. The idea was as audacious as it was expensive. Funded initially by J.P. Morgan to the tune of $150,000, about $4. $5 million today, Wardenclyffe was Tesla's moonshot. Unfortunately, like many ambitious projects, it was also a bottomless pit of expenses. Tesla's vision was grand, but so were his oversights. The tower's construction dragged on, costs ballooned, and Morgan, ever the shrewd businessman, started to see his investment as less of a cutting-edge venture and more of a financial black hole. In 1905, Morgan pulled the plug, leaving Tesla to fend for himself. With no financial backing, the Wardenclyffe project was doomed. Tesla's dream of a wireless utopia was shelved, reduced to an architectural ghost on the Long Island shore. The economic backdrop of these times was ruthless. The U.S. was riding the second industrial revolution, with electricity transforming cities into bustling metropolises. However, this was also a period of economic instability, punctuated by panics and depressions. The market was as volatile as Tesla's own career, and money was hard to come by for speculative endeavors. Investors wanted sure bets, not moonshots, and Tesla's penchant for the latter made him a hard sell. Yet it wasn't just bad luck or bad timing that led to Tesla's financial woes. There were systemic issues at play, too. The patent system, for instance, was a double-edged sword. It protected Tesla's inventions, but also made him a target for relentless litigation. He spent a significant portion of his life in court, defending his patents against infringements, a costly and time-consuming endeavor that drained his resources and his spirit. Moreover, Tesla's reluctance to play the corporate game didn't help his cause. He was a scientist first, businessman a distant second. While Edison was forming companies and building empires, Tesla was busy building dreams. He famously refused to compromise on his ideals or lower his standards, a noble stance that unfortunately didn't pay the bills. His insistence on independence and innovation over profit made him a misfit in a world increasingly driven by capitalism and competition. What makes Tesla's fall from grace all the more poignant is the sheer scale of his contributions to technology. His work laid the foundations for alternating current, AC, wireless communication, and even the very concept of renewable energy. Yet, despite these monumental achievements, he ended his life in relative obscurity, living out his final days in a modest hotel room in New York, feeding pigeons and dreaming of what could have been. In the twilight of his career, Tesla became a tragic figure, a brilliant mind overshadowed by financial struggle and societal indifference. His later innovations, though groundbreaking, lacked the financial backing and public support they needed to succeed. The world had moved on, and Tesla, once at the forefront of technological progress, found himself sidelined. But let's not paint too bleak a picture. Tesla's legacy, though unappreciated in his lifetime, eventually earned him the recognition he deserved. Today, he's celebrated as a pioneer, a visionary who saw the future and dared to dream it into being. His life serves as both an inspiration and a cautionary tale, a reminder that genius, for all its brilliance, can be as fleeting and unpredictable as a spark of electricity. As we leave Tesla for now, his story remains a complex web of triumphs and tribulations. His later years were a testament to the challenges of innovation in an age of rapid change, a time when the line between success and failure was as thin as a filament. But rest assured, there's more to come in this saga of ambition, adversity, and enduring influence. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the enigma that is Nikola Tesla, a man whose life was as electrifying as his inventions. As Tesla's life flickered out like one of his own arc lights, the world quietly turned away, leaving behind the man who had once lit up the night sky, both literally and figuratively. Yet history has a funny way of revisiting its icons, and Tesla's posthumous journey from obscurity to cult figure is a testament to this peculiar historical alchemy. Fast forward to the late 20th century, and Tesla found himself resurrected in the public imagination, his name synonymous not with financial ruin, but with unbridled genius. The man who died in 1943, alone and virtually penniless in a New York hotel, reborn as a symbol of the misunderstood genius, a rallying point for dreamers, inventors, and those who felt out of step with the conventional world. So, how did this come to pass? Part of Tesla's resurgence can be attributed to the burgeoning interest in alternative science and counterculture movements of the 1900s, 60, and 70. Here was a man who defied authority, challenged norms, and envisioned a future that seemed straight out of a science fiction novel. For a generation questioning everything from politics to physics, Tesla was the perfect icon. Books like Tesla, Man Out of Time, by Margaret Cheney, published in 1981, played a significant role in reintroducing Tesla to a curious public. This biography, rich with tales of Tesla's eccentricity and brilliance, painted a portrait that was as fascinating as it was tragic. But beyond the books, it was Tesla's very ideas that sparked renewed interest. As the world grappled with energy crises and looked towards sustainable solutions, Tesla's vision of harnessing renewable energy sources seemed not just prescient, but downright prophetic. His early experiments in wireless energy transmission, once considered the ramblings of a madman, found new relevance in an age where wireless communication had become the norm. Tesla's patents and theories started to be recognized not just as historical footnotes, but as foundational to modern technology. The U.S. Supreme Court's 1943 decision to credit Tesla with the invention of radio, overturning Marconi's patent, was a posthumous validation that added legal weight to his legacy. Here was a man who had envisioned a world interconnected by invisible waves, long before Wi-Fi became a household term. The tech industry, ever on the hunt for inspirational figures, embraced Tesla as a visionary who dared to dream beyond the possible. In 2003, Tesla's name literally became a driving force when the Tesla Motors company was founded, honoring his legacy by pushing the boundaries of electric vehicles. The company's success not only brought Tesla's name back into the spotlight, but also highlighted the gap between his visionary ideas and the commercial success he never achieved in life. But let's pause for a moment and consider the irony. Tesla, a man who struggled to commercialize his inventions, is now the namesake of a company that's become a symbol of innovation and market triumph. It's a testament to the enduring allure of the misunderstood genius, a figure who captivates us precisely because they don't fit neatly into the world as we know it. Tesla's rise to cult status also benefited from the growing fascination with the eccentricities of historical figures. In a world that increasingly values individuality and authenticity, Tesla's quirks, his obsession with pigeons, his phobias, his penchant for working in the dead of night, are seen as marks of a true original. In a way, his life story resonates with anyone who has ever felt like an outsider, misunderstood, or ahead of their time. As we sift through the myths and realities of Tesla's legacy, it's crucial to separate the man from the legend. Yes, Tesla was a genius who saw the future with remarkable clarity, but he was also a man who couldn't reconcile his groundbreaking ideas with the harsh economic realities of his time. His life is a cautionary tale about the precarious balance between innovation and commercial success, a reminder that being right is not always the same as being rewarded. In the end, Tesla's legacy is a complex tapestry woven from equal parts brilliance and tragedy. His story serves as a mirror, reflecting both our aspirations and our limitations. We celebrate Tesla not just for what he achieved, but for what he represents. The eternal struggle between vision and reality, the quest for knowledge, and the inexhaustible human spirit that dares to dream beyond the confines of the ordinary. So, as we wrap up our electrifying journey through the life of Nikola Tesla, let's remember him as more than just a footnote in the annals of scientific history. He was a man who dared to dream, who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. And perhaps, in that daring vision, we find the true essence of his legacy, a legacy that continues to inspire, challenge, and illuminate the path ahead. In the grand tapestry of history, Eleanor of Aquitaine is that one thread everyone keeps talking about, and for good reason. This powerhouse of a woman kicked off her extraordinary life not in the saddle of a glamorous steed, but in the rather unassuming year of 1122. Born to William X, Duke of Aquitaine, she was handed a life script that could have been penned by a medieval screenwriter with a penchant for drama and intrigue. Before you roll your eyes and tune out, let me assure you, Eleanor's story is less like a dusty old manuscript and more like a medieval soap opera, complete with power struggles, a couple of crowns, and a marriage that was about as harmonious as a cat, and a room full of laser pointers. Eleanor's early years in Aquitaine were marked by opulence and culture, a far cry from the mud and turnips existence many peasants endured. Her father, William X, wasn't just any duke. He was the duke, lording over the largest and richest duchy in France. Aquitaine was practically the medieval version of a mega-corporation, complete with vineyards and a flair for troubadours. If you can imagine a young girl growing up surrounded by poetry and music, yet having the political acumen of a Wall Street executive, you're getting close to understanding Eleanor's formative years. Now, here's where things start getting juicy. In 1137, at the tender age of 15, Eleanor inherited this enormous duchy because her father, in a move reminiscent of a Shakespearean plot twist, kicked the bucket while on a pilgrimage. Talk about a baptism by fire. Suddenly, Eleanor was not just a teenager with a knack for handling power. She was a duchess with lands that made her the most eligible bachelorette in all of Europe. Enter Louis Roman VII of France, the lucky chap who would become Eleanor's first husband. Picture a king whose idea of a good time was less about conquest and more about contemplative walks and theological debates. Louis was a pious guy thrust into the royal spotlight after his older brother died in a freak horse accident, because, of course, medieval life was nothing if not precarious. Louis and Eleanor's marriage was like pairing a fiery salsa with plain oatmeal. You'd think opposites attract, but in this case, it was more like opposites barely tolerated each other. The union was less about starry-eyed romance and more about political chess. Eleanor brought the sprawling, wealthy lands of Aquitaine to the table, while Louis contributed, well, his crown and a penchant for penance. The newlyweds' honeymoon was a less-than-idyllic journey to the Cathedral of Bordeaux, which may sound romantic, but was more of a political statement than a getaway. Their marital bliss was tested early on by the Second Crusade, a holy campaign that Louis eagerly joined. Eleanor, never one to shy away from adventure, decided to tag along, because why not spice up a crusade with a touch of marital discord? Eleanor's presence on the crusade was like having a rock star on a diplomatic mission. She reportedly traveled with an entourage of 300 women, which is about as subtle as a medieval marching band. The chronicles of the time gleefully recount how Eleanor and her ladies rode astride, dressed in armor. It was less about playing dress-up and more about making a statement. Women could be just as formidable as men on the road to Jerusalem. But alas, this grand adventure quickly turned sour. The crusade was a logistical nightmare, with the French army about as organized as a medieval flea market. Eleanor and Louis's relationship hit rock bottom when accusations flew that she was too chummy with her uncle, Raymond of Antioch. This wasn't just family drama. It was a political scandal with a side of medieval tabloid fodder. Picture Louis, red-faced and fuming, dragging Eleanor away from the siege of Damascus, cutting their crusade short in a huff. Back in France, the cracks in their marriage were as wide as the English Channel. While Louis wanted to spend his days in prayer and reflection, Eleanor was more interested in court politics and making her voice heard. The couple's incompatibility was underscored by their lack of a male heir, a serious problem when your job description is King and Queen of France. After 15 years of bickering and one daughter later, marriage was annulled in 1152 on the grounds of consanguinity, a fancy way of saying they were a bit too closely related. Convenient, right? Eleanor wasted no time in finding a new partner, but that's a story for another day. For now, let's bask in the sheer audacity of a woman who dared to defy the norms of her time, navigating the cutthroat world of medieval politics with a wit sharper than any sword. Eleanor of Aquitaine, a duchess, a queen, and a trailblazer in every sense of the word. If you think the next chapters of her life are going to be any less entertaining, well, you'd be mistaken. So, Eleanor of Aquitaine, queen of 2 nations and mother of none to her current hubby, was now back in France. But before you could say marriage counseling, she was already plotting her next move. You see, Eleanor wasn't just the medieval version of a power player. She was the entire chessboard. But let's not jump ahead. We're still knee-deep in the Second Crusade, a fiasco that, if you asked any historian, was as organized as a cat-herding competition and twice as chaotic. The crusade kicked off in 1147, and it was supposed to be a grand reunion of Christian Europe under one banner. In reality, it was more like a chaotic family road trip where everyone forgot the map and the snacks. Eleanor, with her entourage of 300 women, because why not make a statement, was ready to take Jerusalem by storm. And she wasn't just there to sit on the sidelines. She came clad in what some chroniclers claimed was Amazonian attire. Picture this, Eleanor in armor, leading her ladies like the world's first influencer army. Forget social media. Eleanor was trending in every medieval gossip column from Paris to Jerusalem. But here's where we bust a myth or two. The idea of Eleanor as a warrior queen, decked out like a mythical Amazon, is mostly the stuff of legend. While it's true she rode alongside her husband, the armor bit is likely an embellishment. Chronicles love a good story, and nothing sells like a queen in chain mail. Yet, there's no denying she was a formidable presence, influencing diplomatic talks and rallying troops. In a world where women were often relegated to the background, Eleanor was the headline act. Speaking of headlines, let's talk about the real showstopper, Eleanor's rumored closeness with her uncle, Raymond of Antioch. This wasn't just medieval gossip, it was a full-blown scandal. Raymond, a handsome and charismatic player in the crusading world, was the kind of guy who could charm the sandals off a pilgrim. Eleanor's rapport with him raised eyebrows, enough to make Louis Roman VII see red. In a classic case of jealousy meets politics, Louis accused Eleanor of being a bit too cozy with her uncle. Whether it was platonic or not, we'll never know, but it drove a wedge so deep between the royal couple you could fit a crusader army through it. As if that wasn't enough drama, the crusade itself was a disaster. Louis's army faced everything from logistical nightmares to hostile locals. By the time they reached Damascus in 1148, they were more like a ragtag band of weary travelers than a formidable force. The siege of Damascus was a debacle, lasting just a few days before Louis decided to pack it in and head home, tail between his legs. Eleanor, undoubtedly fed up with Louis's lack of leadership and the general state of affairs, was dragged back to France, leaving behind a trail of rumors and a marriage in shambles. Back home, the marital discord was as evident as a bad haircut. Eleanor, ever the savvy politician, realized her marriage to Louis was as doomed as the crusade. The lack of a male heir didn't help matters. Royal marriages were less about love and more about securing the dynasty. With only daughters to show for 15 years of royal union, Eleanor and Louis were in an awkward spot. Cue the medieval annulment, on the grounds of consanguinity, no less. Conveniently, they were apparently too related for holy matrimony, an excuse as old as time for royals seeking a graceful exit. Now, here's where things get spicy. Legend has it that Pope Eugene Roman III, in a last-ditch attempt to save their marriage, set up a blessing bed. This wasn't some ancient marital therapy, but a literal bed blessed by the Pope himself, where the couple was supposed to rekindle their romance. Spoiler alert. It didn't work. Eleanor wasn't one to be swayed by papal theatrics when political opportunity knocked. Just months after the annulment, she wasted no time marrying Henry Plantagenet, the future Henry Roman II of England. Talk about trading up. In the blink of an eye, Eleanor went from Queen of France to Queen-in-Waiting of England, setting the stage for the next chapter in her saga. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll save that for another day. For now, let's ponder the audacity of a queen who defied convention, wielded her own power, and despite the odds, managed to steer her own destiny. Eleanor of Aquitaine. If you're not impressed yet, stick around. The best is yet to come. Now, if you thought Eleanor's life was already a roller coaster, buckle up, because her marriage to Henry Plantagenet was like trading a merry-go-round for a high-speed chase. Eleanor didn't just marry Henry Roman II. She practically helped invent the concept of a power couple. This was no medieval fairy tale. It was a strategic alliance with enough drama to rival any royal reality show. Within 2 years of their nuptials in 1152, Henry ascended the English throne, and Eleanor became Queen Consort of England. Talk about a swift career move. This was the medieval equivalent of going from intern to CEO overnight. Henry, the fiery young duke who became king, was a Renaissance man before the Renaissance even existed. He was a warrior, a scholar, and a statesman, when he wasn't busy being a hothead, that is. But let's not sugarcoat it. Henry was as temperamental as a medieval weather vane in a hurricane, and Eleanor had her work cut out for her. Yet, she was no shrinking violet. Eleanor's political savvy was the real deal, and she had the receipts to prove it. She helped Henry consolidate his power, turning his sprawling domains into the Angevin Empire, a patchwork quilt of territories that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees. Eleanor wasn't just the queen. She was the queen bee, wielding influence like a maestro conducts an orchestra. She knew how to play the power game better than most men, and she wasn't shy about it. As queen, Eleanor wasn't just sitting pretty in the royal court. She was actively involved in administration, diplomacy, and even justice. When Henry was off fighting wars or quelling rebellions, Eleanor often held the reins, making her one of the most powerful women in Europe. Their marriage, while politically advantageous, was far from idyllic. Henry's knack for infidelity was as legendary as his military campaigns. It said he had more mistresses than a soap opera villain, which was a bit much even by medieval standards. Eleanor, however, was no pushover. She managed to maintain her own power base in Aquitaine, a region she ruled with a firm yet fair hand. Eleanor was the epitome of grace under pressure, handling her husband's indiscretions with a strategic mind and a heart of steel. Now, let's talk about the Plantagenet family dynamics, which were as complex as a Shakespearean tragedy with a side of comedy. With 8 children, 5 sons and 3 daughters, Eleanor and Henry's household was less happily ever after and more Game of Thrones, family edition. Their sons were a rowdy bunch, each with a claim to power and a penchant for rebellion. The most notable of these was Richard, the lion-hearted warrior and John, who would later earn the dubious honor of being one of England's most infamous kings. The real kicker came with the infamous revolt of 1173-74. Picture this: Eleanor, the formidable queen, aligning with her sons against Henry in a rebellion that shook the foundations of the Angevin Empire. It was less a family squabble and more a full-blown civil war, complete with castles under siege and political alliances shifting like sand in a desert. But why, you ask, would Eleanor back her sons against their own father? Well, sit tight, because this is where the plot thickens. Henry's propensity for treating his sons like chess pieces didn't sit well with Eleanor. She was fiercely protective of her children's rights and futures, and she saw Henry's attempts to control their destinies as a threat to her own legacy. The revolt was as much about securing her son's power as it was about challenging Henry's overbearing rule. In a world where land equaled power, Eleanor was determined to carve out a future for her sons that didn't involve them playing second fiddle to their father. The revolt itself was a dramatic affair. Eleanor's sons, egged on by their mother, allied with the French king, ironic, given Eleanor's past as Queen of France, and even managed to garner support from Scottish and Flemish forces. It was a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, with Eleanor pulling the strings from behind the scenes. However, like any good drama, it didn't end in triumph for Eleanor. Henry, ever the strategist, managed to quell the rebellion with a combination of military might and savvy negotiation. The aftermath was as bitter as it was brutal. Eleanor was captured and imprisoned by Henry, spending the next 16 years under house arrest, a queen in exile within her own realm. Yet even confinement couldn't quell her spirit. Eleanor's legacy was far from over. It planted the seeds of power in her sons, ensuring that her influence would continue to shape the course of history long after the revolt. Her imprisonment, while harsh, only added to her legend as a queen who dared to defy the king. As we leave Eleanor in her gilded cage, plotting future moves like a chess grandmaster, remember that her story is far from over. She was a force of nature, a pioneer in an era that demanded women know their place, and Eleanor never did. So, as we pause on this chapter of her life, one thing is clear. Eleanor of Aquitaine was not just a queen, but a queen-maker, a woman whose life was a testament to resilience, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of power. Stay tuned for the next thrilling installment in the saga of this remarkable woman, where the stakes get even higher, and the drama, well, it's just beginning. As Eleanor of Aquitaine sat in her plush yet confining quarters, pondering her next move, it was clear that her story was far from over. Sure, Henry had her under lock and key, but let's not shed too many tears for Eleanor. Her imprisonment was less about damp dungeons and more about a comfortable, albeit restricted, lifestyle. Think of it as being grounded but with better amenities, like a medieval airman with a strict curfew. She was in a castle, not a cell, and despite the gilded cage, she remained a force to be reckoned with. Fast forward to 1189, when Henry Roman II shuffled off this mortal coil, and Eleanor was finally released from her royal detention. With Henry out of the picture, it was time for a change of the guard. Enter her son, Richard the Lionheart, a name that sounds like he should be leading a pride of actual lions into battle. Richard was everything his father was not: charismatic, bold, and with a personality as outsized as his ambition. But let's not kid ourselves. He wasn't the sharpest sword in the armory when it came to ruling. Eleanor wasted no time stepping back into the political spotlight. At 67, she should have been knitting chainmail cozies or something equally mundane by the standards of medieval womanhood. Instead, she was orchestrating power plays like a maestro conducting a symphony. She became the de facto ruler while Richard was off gallivanting on crusades, proving once again that she was the real MVP of the Plantagenet dynasty. Richard's reign was more about glory than governance. He spent roughly 6 months of his 10-year rule actually in England, preferring to indulge his inner action hero on the Third Crusade. Meanwhile, Eleanor was back home, running the show and keeping the kingdom from collapsing like a poorly made soufflé. She managed the treasury, quelled rebellions, and generally ensured the realm didn't descend into chaos. It wasn't just a matter of keeping the lights on. She was the light, guiding the kingdom through political storms with the deft touch of a seasoned captain. But here's where things get even juicier. In 1192, Richard was captured and held for ransom on his way back from the crusade. The price tag, a whopping 150,000 marks, or about 3 times the annual revenue of the English crown. That's like being hit with a medieval parking ticket, but on a national scale. Who stepped up to manage this colossal crisis? You guessed it, Eleanor. She spearheaded the effort to raise the ransom, effectively crowdfunding her son's freedom before Kickstarter was even a twinkle in history's eye. This was no small feat, involving a nationwide tax that made Eleanor about as popular as a tax collector at a party. With Richard's release secured, Eleanor's influence only grew. Yet her role wasn't just about keeping Richard's throne warm. She was actively shaping policy and negotiating treaties. Her political acumen was sharper than a knight's sword, and she wielded it with the finesse of a master strategist. Whether it was mediating disputes or arranging alliances, Eleanor's hand was always on the wheel, steering England through turbulent waters. And then there was John. If Richard was the lion, John was the proverbial black sheep. Known for losing his ancestral lands in France and signing the Magna Carta under duress, he wasn't exactly England's most celebrated monarch. Yet Eleanor saw potential, or at least necessity, in his rule. With Richard's untimely death from an arrow wound in 1199, John was next in line. Eleanor, ever the pragmatic power broker, turned her attention to securing his succession, her greatest coup in John's favor, the marriage alliance with the Spanish kingdom of Castile, which she orchestrated by embarking on a grueling journey across the Pyrenees at the ripe old age of 77. This wasn't just a casual jaunt over a few hills. It was a trek through rugged landscapes that would make even the most seasoned traveler balk. Picture Eleanor, silver-haired yet indomitable, leading an entourage through mountains and valleys, defying age and expectation to secure a future for her lineage. Her destination was Castile, where she aimed to negotiate a marriage that would strengthen John's hand and, by extension, stabilize his reign. This audacious move was more than just a grandmotherly gesture. It was a masterclass in high-stakes diplomacy. The marriage of her granddaughter, Blanche of Castile, to the French crown prince would forge a crucial alliance. Eleanor knew that in the game of thrones, marriages were the chess pieces, and she was the grandmaster moving them. Her journey wasn't just a testament to her physical resilience. It was a symbol of her enduring influence and strategic brilliance. Eleanor's later years were a study in unparalleled legacy building. She navigated the complexities of medieval politics with the dexterity of a juggler at a royal court, keeping multiple balls in the air while ensuring none hit the ground. Even as age advanced, her mind remained as sharp as her wit, and her legacy as enduring as the stone castles she once called home. So, as we leave Eleanor poised on the brink of yet another political triumph, remember that her story is far from over. Her life was a tapestry of ambition, resilience, and power, a saga that continues to captivate, challenge, and inspire. As we prepare to delve into the final chapter of her extraordinary life, one thing is certain. Eleanor of Aquitaine was not just a queen of 2 nations, but a queen of hearts and minds, whose legacy would echo through the corridors of history for centuries to come. Stay tuned for the grand finale, where the drama intensifies and the legend of Eleanor reaches its epic conclusion. Eleanor of Aquitaine's legacy is as complex as the medieval world she navigated, a world she shaped more than most kings of her era. But let's cut through the romanticized fluff and get to the meat of the matter. Was she the scheming, manipulative femme fatale of legend, or a politically astute powerhouse who played the long game? Spoiler alert, it's the latter. Eleanor wasn't out there twirling a metaphorical mustache while plotting the downfall of kingdoms. She was a woman who knew the stakes and played them to win. First, let's debunk the myth of Eleanor as a scheming villainess. Sure, medieval chroniclers loved a good scandal, and Eleanor's life provided plenty of fodder. But much of the intrigue was less about her being a puppet master and more about her being a master of survival. Consider her marriage to Louis Roman VII of France. It wasn't Eleanor whispering sweet nothings of rebellion in her son's ears that led to the revolt of 1173-74. It was her shrewd understanding that her children's future, her legacy, was at risk under Henry Roman II's overbearing rule. Eleanor's actions were strategic responses to the chessboard of power, not the cackling machinations of a fairy tale villain. Now, onto the reality of Eleanor as a political juggernaut. Her impact on European politics was seismic. She wasn't just a queen, she was a kingmaker, a diplomat, and a cultural icon. Her marriage alliances alone read like a who's who of European royalty, weaving a web of influence that stretched across the continent. Eleanor's strategic marriages, like the one she arranged for her granddaughter Blanche, weren't just about securing peace. They were about crafting a legacy that would echo through the ages. Blanche of Castile would go on to be the mother of Louis Roman IX of France, a king who would be canonized as a saint. Talk about a family tree with branches reaching into sainthood. Eleanor's influence wasn't confined to the political arena. She was a cultural pioneer as well. Her court in Poitiers was a beacon of art and literature, a veritable renaissance before the Renaissance. Eleanor's patronage of troubadours and poets helped cement the ideals of courtly love, a concept that would shape Western literature for centuries. Her court became a cultural hub, where poets like Chrétien de Troyes crafted tales of chivalry and romance that still captivate us today. Eleanor's promotion of these ideals wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a savvy political move, cultivating a culture that elevated her court's prestige and influence. But why does Eleanor's story still resonate today? Because she was a woman ahead of her time, refusing to be pigeonholed by the constraints of her era. In a world where women were expected to be seen and not heard, Eleanor was a resounding voice. Her life was a masterclass in leveraging what little power women had to effect monumental change. Eleanor's ability to navigate the treacherous waters of medieval politics, her resilience in the face of personal and political adversity, and her unyielding pursuit of agency make her a figure as relevant today as she was in the 12th century. She's a reminder that influence isn't always about the power you hold, but about how you wield it. Eleanor's life was both a product of her time and a defiance of it. She was born into a world where women were pawns in the political game, yet she played that game with a finesse that outmaneuvered many of her male counterparts. Her story is a testament to the power of resilience and intellect over brute strength. In a time when kings ruled with an iron fist, Eleanor ruled with a sharp mind, proving that the pen, or in her case, the strategic alliance, was mightier than the sword. Her legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of power, culture, and resilience. Eleanor was a queen of two nations and a queen of hearts, whose influence transcended borders and centuries. She was a trailblazer, a pioneer of diplomacy and culture, and her story is a reminder that history isn't just shaped by those who wield swords, but by those who wield influence. Eleanor of Aquitaine, a name that echoes through history as a beacon of power, strategy, and resilience, and a reminder that sometimes the most formidable warriors aren't those on the battlefield, but those who shape it from behind the scenes. And so, as we conclude this saga of Eleanor's remarkable life, let's remember her not just as a legend, not just as a queen, but as a woman who defied the odds and shaped the course of history. Her story is a testament to the indomitable spirit of a woman who refused to be defined by her circumstances, but instead defined them. Eleanor of Aquitaine, a force of nature, a queen of two nations, and a legacy that will never fade. As the curtain falls on this chapter of history, one thing is certain. Eleanor's story will continue to inspire, challenge, and captivate us for generations to come. Pharaohs were the original celebrities of the ancient world. Think of them as the Kardashians of the Nile, but with fewer reality shows and more actual reality. These rulers weren't just sitting on thrones. They were perched on pedestals of divine status, brandishing a crook and flail like they were accessories from the latest fashion line. Their political power wasn't just a matter of governance. It was a full-blown PR campaign that would make even the best spin doctors envious. Let's start with the bling. The pharaohs had more gold than Fort Knox could dream of, and they wore it with a kind of regal nonchalance that screamed, "Look at me, I'm as close to a god as you can get without actually being one." Their palaces weren't just homes. They were sprawling complexes designed to inspire awe, and let's be honest, a little bit of envy. Ever heard of the Great Palace at Amarna? It was built by Pharaoh Aquitaine and stretched over more than 5,000 acres. That's about 3,000 football fields of pure, unadulterated opulence. But here's the kicker. All that luxury wasn't just for show. It was a carefully crafted image meant to reinforce their divine right to rule. You see, being seen as a god wasn't just a matter of personal vanity. It was a political necessity. If people believed the pharaoh was a living god, they were less likely to question why they were paying more in taxes than they were earning. Clever, right? And those taxes, oh boy, they were hefty. The peasants and workers of Egypt were footing the bill for the pharaoh's divine lifestyle, contributing grain, labor, and livestock. It wasn't exactly a fair trade, but hey, someone had to pay for all that gold leaf. The grandeur of their tombs, like the famous pyramids of Giza, was funded by the sweat and toil of thousands. The pyramid of Khufu, for instance, involved over 2 million blocks of stone, each weighing about 5 tons. That's a lot of heavy lifting for a monument to one man's ego. Yet, despite the heavy burden on the common folk, the myth of the god king persisted. Perhaps it was the allure of being ruled by a divine entity, or maybe it was just too dangerous to say otherwise. After all, questioning a god wasn't a career move that ended well, unless you fancied a quick introduction to the afterlife. Speaking of the afterlife, pharaohs took their tombs seriously. They built them to last, much like an ancient version of an ironclad retirement plan. These were no ordinary graves. They were portals to eternity, replete with treasures meant to accompany them into the next world. The tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered in 1922, was filled with over 5,000 artifacts, including a solid gold coffin and a dagger made from meteorite iron. Talk about space-age tech. But here's the thing. While the pharaohs were busy building their eternal homes, the peasants were constructing their own kind of legacy. It wasn't made of stone or gold, but of the hard work that kept the kingdom running. They were the unsung heroes, the ones who tilled the fields, built the monuments, and paid the taxes that allowed the pharaohs to live like gods on earth. So, was the pharaoh's divine status a genuine belief, or just a clever marketing ploy? It's hard to say. But one thing's for sure. They played the role to perfection, and in doing so, they left behind a legacy that's as enduring as the pyramids themselves. They were the rock stars of their time, with more bling than a Las Vegas wedding chapel, and a status that was as much about perception as it was about power. While the pharaohs were busy living their best lives in golden splendor, someone had to keep the whole operation from collapsing like a poorly constructed pyramid. Enter the noble class, the unsung heroes of ancient Egyptian bureaucracy. Think of them as the middle management in this grand historical drama. They didn't have the bling or divine status of the pharaohs, but they were the ones making sure the Nile didn't overflow with uncashed checks. Let's start with the viziers, the pharaoh's right-hand men, and the ancient world's equivalent of a CEO. These guys were tasked with the unenviable job of keeping the kingdom's gears well-oiled. From overseeing the massive agricultural projects to making sure the taxes were rolling in, they were the masters of multitasking. One famous vizier, named Tahodab, served during the Old Kingdom and was so influential that he even penned a book of maxims on how to live a virtuous life. Think of it as the ancient Egyptian version of how to win friends and influence people, but with more references to the afterlife. Viziers were also the ultimate HR managers, promoting loyalty among the nobility and keeping the workforce in line. They had the power to appoint officials, which was a bit like being the head of a job lottery where the prizes were lifetime appointments. But here's the catch. Mess up, and you weren't just out of a job. You might find yourself on the wrong end of a crocodile's lunch menu. Job security, ancient Egyptian style, was all about keeping your head, literally. Then there were the scribes, the unsung heroes with ink-stained hands. These guys were the data analysts of their day, and their favorite tool wasn't Excel but papyrus scrolls. Without them, Egyptian civilization would have been like a concert without the band, all grand gestures with no substance. They recorded everything from crop yields and tax records to the latest building projects. In a world where literacy was rarer than a rainstorm in the Sahara, their skills were gold. Scribes were so important that they were often depicted in art sitting in a posture of wisdom, complete with a stylus and a scroll. Forget about an MBA. In ancient Egypt, being a scribe was your ticket to the middle class. These bureaucratic wizards were also responsible for keeping track of the pharaoh's expenditures, which, let's be honest, was like trying to balance a checkbook during a shopping spree. The pharaohs were the ultimate impulse buyers, except their purchases included monumental temples and colossal statues of themselves. Thanks to the detailed accounts left behind by these scribes, we know that temples often received lavish gifts from the throne, including fields, livestock, and even entire villages. The Temple of Karnak, for instance, wasn't just a spiritual center. It was practically a small city funded by royal largesse. Speaking of funding, let's talk taxes. Ancient Egypt was one of the earliest societies to implement a complex taxation system, and the bureaucrats were the ones making sure those taxes flowed like the Nile in flood season. Every year, during the inundation when the Nile flooded its banks, tax assessors would measure the area of land covered by water. More water meant more fertile land, which meant higher taxes. It was a clever system that kept everyone accountable, except, of course, the pharaohs, who were exempt from such mundane concerns. But this system was not without its challenges. Corruption was as rife as the grain in the Nile Delta. Some officials were known to skim a little off the top, and by a little, I mean enough to build their own mini-palaces. Despite these hiccups, the bureaucracy kept chugging along, proving that even in ancient times, people knew how to play the system. Now, in the midst of all this administrative hustle, the nobility also played a crucial role in keeping the myth of the divine pharaoh alive. They organized lavish ceremonies and festivals, ensuring that the image of the god king was as polished as a freshly quarried obelisk. These events weren't just for kicks, were essential for maintaining the social order. The annual Apit festival in Thebes, for instance, was a major religious event that reinforced the idea that the pharaoh was the earthly embodiment of the god Ammon. Picture a grand parade with priests, musicians, and boats gliding down the Nile, all orchestrated to remind everyone that the pharaoh wasn't just any ruler but a divine one. And let's not forget the marriage alliances. Nobles often married into the royal family, which was both a strategic move and a surefire way to keep that royal bloodline as pure as possible. The most famous of these alliances was perhaps that of Queen Nefertiti, who was not just a pretty face, but a powerful political player. Her marriage to Aquitaine was a game-changer, leading to one of the most revolutionary periods in Egyptian history, marked by religious upheaval and artistic innovation. So, while the pharaohs basked in divine glory, it was the noble class that kept the machine running smoothly. They were the ones balancing the books, ensuring that the temples were stocked, and keeping the wheels of governance turning. Without them, the pharaohs would have been like rock stars without a road crew. Glamorous, yes, but ultimately unsustainable. The noble class might not have had their names etched in stone as often as their royal counterparts, but their legacy lies in the very fabric of Egyptian society. In a world where your social standing was often as fixed as a hieroglyph, the nobility managed to carve out a niche for themselves, ensuring that even as the sands of time shifted, their contributions would not be buried. They were the linchpins of the kingdom, the ones who really made it all happen, often without the fanfare or the fancy tombs. But that's the thing about history. It's not always written by those who lived it. Sometimes it's the quiet, unassuming scribes and hard-working viziers who deserve the applause. While the noble class was busy balancing the scales of divine rule, the peasants were out in the fields, breaking their backs to keep those scales from tipping over. The peasants were the real MVPs of ancient Egypt, though you'd never know it from the grand narratives carved into temple walls. Their daily grind was anything but glamorous, more akin to a high-intensity workout than a pastoral dream. Let's strip away the romantic veneer and dive into the nitty-gritty of life as an ancient Egyptian peasant. First off, forget the image of peasants whistling while they worked under the benevolent gaze of a golden sun. The reality was a lot more sweat and a lot less song. The Nile River, the lifeblood of Egypt, was both a blessing and a curse. Sure, it offered fertile soil, but it also demanded constant attention, like a needy pet that occasionally flooded your living room. Annual inundation was like an ancient version of a stock market crash. If you weren't prepared, your fields could turn from gold mines into mud pits. The agricultural calendar revolved around the Nile's moods. From June to September, the river would swell, depositing a rich layer of silt that was perfect for farming. But this was no time for a holiday. As soon as the waters receded, it was all hands on deck to sow seeds before the soil dried out. The planting season, Perrott from October to February, was a race against time. Imagine the stress of filing your taxes, but instead of a deadline, you had Mother Nature breathing down your neck. And let's not forget the tools of the trade. No John Deere tractors here, folks. Peasants wielded wooden plows pulled by oxen, which was about as efficient as using a spoon to dig a swimming pool. Yet, in this arduous environment, the family unit was the backbone of success. Everyone pitched in, from the youngest child to the oldest grandparent. It was a team effort that would put corporate team-building retreats to shame. Now, you might be wondering, what did these peasants get for all their hard work? In theory, they were farming their own plots of land, but in practice, much of their yield went straight into the coffers of the pharaoh and temples. Imagine working overtime only to have your paycheck garnished for the privilege of doing so. The state took its cut, the temples took theirs, and whatever was left, well, that was dinner, and breakfast, and lunch. But wait, you say, weren't these peasants happy in their toil, basking in the satisfaction of contributing to the grandeur of Egypt? Not quite. This image of the content peasant was a product of ancient propaganda. The pharaohs and their PR machine, those crafty scribes, depicted labor as a noble duty, a way to serve the divine. But let's face it, swinging a hoe in the midday sun wasn't exactly a spiritual experience. In fact, the ancient Egyptian word for peasant often shared roots with words meaning exhausted or burdened. That should give you a clue about their day-to-day sentiments. Still, the myth of the happy peasant persisted, perhaps because acknowledging the truth would be like admitting the emperor had no clothes, or in this case, the pharaoh had no divine glow. It's not that the peasants didn't find moments of joy or community. They did, just not in the way the official narrative suggested. Festivals and religious events offered brief escapes from the toil, and communal activities like brewing beer or baking bread were social as much as they were survival tactics. Beer, by the way, wasn't just a beverage. It was a dietary staple, akin to a liquid loaf of bread. In a world where water wasn't always safe, beer was the safer alternative. Plus, a little buzz took the edge off a hard day's work. Speaking of hard work, let's address the elephant, or rather, the pyramid, in the room. Yes, the pyramids were built by Egyptian laborers, not slaves as once popularly believed. But while the laborers were technically free, their work conditions were anything but cushy. Imagine hauling 2-ton blocks of limestone in the blazing sun, only to be rewarded with a diet of bread and onions. It's not exactly the kind of job you'd brag about at parties. Yet, these monumental projects were a double-edged sword. On one hand, they represented the pinnacle of human achievement and ambition. On the other, they were the ultimate expression of exploitation, a testament to what humans will endure for a cause they may not even believe in. The peasants may not have etched their names on the pyramids, but their toil is the true foundation of these wonders. So, what kept these peasants going? Part of it was necessity. Survival is a powerful motivator. But there was also a sense of duty ingrained by a culture that revered the pharaoh as a living god. Questioning the status quo wasn't just frowned upon, it was unthinkable. In a world where the afterlife loomed large, the promise of eternal reward was a powerful tool for maintaining order. In the grand tapestry of ancient Egypt, the peasants were the unsung heroes, the threads that held everything together, while the pharaohs and nobles grabbed the spotlight. Their lives were a complex mix of hardship and resilience, shaped by forces as unpredictable as the Nile itself. They may not have left behind golden tombs or grandiose monuments, but their legacy is etched into the very fabric of Egyptian history. And as we continue to unravel their stories, we find not just a tale of endurance, but a testament to the power of the human spirit to thrive against all odds. As we ponder the trials and tribulations of the Egyptian peasant, let's not forget the quieter moments, the stolen joys amidst the grind. These were people who, despite their burdens, found ways to carve out small victories in the shadow of the pyramids. Their story is far from over, and as we continue to explore the layers of ancient Egyptian society, we'll uncover more about their lives, loves, and legacies. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the world they helped build, one grain of sand at a time. As we continue our deep dive into the world the Egyptian peasants helped build, let's shift gears and take a closer look at the real power play of ancient Egypt, religion. You see, in the grand circus of Egyptian society, religion wasn't just a sideshow. It was the main event, the ringmaster with a megaphone keeping everyone in line. And believe me, it was as much about social control as it was about spiritual enlightenment. Let's talk about the myth of the afterlife, that shimmering carrot dangled before the eyes of every Egyptian, from the pharaohs in their golden chariots to the peasants sweating it out in the fields. The Egyptians had a love affair with the afterlife that would put even the most dedicated rom-com to shame. They believed that life continued after death, a journey that required a well-stocked tomb and a heart lighter than a feather. Literally. According to the Book of the Dead, a soul's worth was weighed against the feather of Mad, the goddess of truth and justice. Fail that weigh-in, and it was game over. Your heart would become a snack for Amit, the demoness with the body of a lion, the head of a crocodile, and the attitude of a bouncer at an exclusive club. But let's peel back the layers of this mystical onion. The afterlife wasn't just a comforting fantasy. It was a nifty tool for keeping the population in check. Think about it. If everyone believed that their eternal fate depended on their behavior in this life, they'd be less inclined to rock the boat. Who's going to stage a rebellion when a bad move could land you in an eternal timeout with Amit? This belief system was the ancient version of a cosmic carrot and stick, and it worked like a charm, or should I say, a scarab amulet. Now, let's pivot to the monumental enterprises that were temple buildings. If you thought these architectural marvels were just about worship, think again. Temples were the ancient Egyptian equivalent of multifunctional complexes, serving as spiritual centers, economic hubs, and the OG entertainment venues. Take the Temple of Karnak in Thebes, for instance. Not just a place to whisper your hopes to the gods. It sprawled over 200 acres and took more than 2,000 years to complete. That's a construction schedule that would make even the most patient contractor break out in a cold sweat. But why invest so heavily in these stone wonders? Well, aside from being divine residences, temples were economic powerhouses. They owned land, employed workers, and were centers of trade. The treasury of a temple often rivaled that of the pharaoh, donations pouring in from the faithful like ancient crowdfunding. One inscription at Karnak boasts of receiving 65,000 cattle, 500 geese, and 450,000 loaves of bread. That's not just a house of worship. It's a supermarket with a sideline in spiritual salvation. And let's not forget the festivals. These were less about religious devotion and more about keeping the masses entertained and distracted. The Apit Festival, for example, was an annual spectacle that turned Thebes into the Las Vegas of the ancient world. For 27 days, the city was awash with music, dancing, and enough beer to float a fleet of papyrus boats. The highlight was a grand procession where the statue of Ammon, the king of the gods, was paraded through the city, presumably to remind everyone who was boss. These festivals served a dual purpose. They reinforced the divine status of the pharaoh and guards, while also providing a much-needed break from the drudgery of daily life. For your average peasant, it was a chance to let loose, forget about the taxes and the toil, and maybe even snag a free loaf of bread. As for the priests, they got to strut their stuff, showing off their importance in the cosmic order. It was a win-win, unless you were the one footing the bill, which of course was the state, or rather, the taxpayers. But let's not be too hasty in scoffing at these spectacles. The myth of the afterlife and the grandeur of temples and festivals provided a tapestry of meaning in a world that could be as harsh as a desert sun. In the absence of modern distractions, these rituals offered a sense of community, a shared narrative that bound people together across classes and generations. And in a society where the pharaoh was a god on earth, participating in these events was both an act of faith and of social cohesion. However, beneath the glittering surface of divine architecture and spiritual promises, there lurked a more pragmatic reality. The temples needed upkeep, the festivals needed funding, and the guards, it seemed, had expensive tastes. All of this required resources, labor, and most importantly, a populace willing to buy into the system. It was a delicate balancing act, a perpetual game of give and take where religion was both the glue and the grease that kept the wheels of society turning. In truth, the elaborate religious system of ancient Egypt was a masterclass in social engineering. It convinced a nation that their place in the afterlife depended on their actions in this one, that their toil and taxes were not just for the pharaoh's pleasure, but for their own eternal benefit. It's a testament to the power of belief and the art of persuasion, where faith and politics walked hand in hand down the Nile's banks. So, as we prepare to dive deeper into this fascinating world, remember that the temples and tombs were not just relics of a forgotten past. They were the stage upon which the drama of Egyptian life played out, where gods and mortals mingled in a dance as intricate as the hieroglyphs that adorned their walls. Stay tuned, as we continue to unravel the threads of this ancient tapestry, exploring how the myths and realities of religion shaped the lives of all who called Egypt home. The temples and tombs, those magnificent testaments to human ambition and divine devotion, were more than just stone and mortar. They were the beating heart of a society that wove gods, kings, and commoners into an intricate tapestry that has fascinated us for millennia. But let's not get too caught up in the grandeur without peeking behind the curtain where the real action happened. Ancient Egypt's social structure wasn't just a static hierarchy. It was a complex ecosystem that set the stage for future civilizations to play out their own dramas of power and inequality. First, let's tackle the elephant-sized pyramid in the room, the idea of a perfect, harmonious society. We've all heard the romanticized version where everyone knew their place, and the system hummed along like a well-tuned lyre. The truth, more like a clunky ensemble with the occasional discordant note. The pharaohs, with their divine claims and golden bling, were more than just figureheads. They were the ultimate brand ambassadors of a system that saw inequality not as a bug, but a feature. The pharaoh's divine status, that celestial marketing ploy, was a strategic move that kept the social order as rigid as the columns of Karnak. By convincing the masses that their king was a god on earth, any murmurs of discontent were quickly drowned out by the symphony of awe and reverence. It's hard to stage a coup when the guy you're plotting against is supposedly backed by Ra himself. Yet beneath this celestial facade, the gears of bureaucracy churned, with the noble class and scribes ensuring everything ran smoothly, or at least as smoothly as a society with a penchant for colossal statues could manage. And what about the peasants, you ask? The real MVPs, grinding away in the fields while the elites basked in their own reflected glory. They were the living testament to the adage that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Their toil funded the pharaoh's opulence. Their labor carved the very monuments that stood as symbols of power and continuity. And while we might romanticize the idea of the contented peasant, the reality was more a tale of endurance than of joy. Yet, in their silent perseverance, they laid down the roots of a societal structure that future civilizations would emulate, adapt, and sometimes outright copy. Fast forward a few millennia, and you'll see echoes of ancient Egypt in the class systems of medieval Europe, the bureaucratic machinations of imperial China, and even the tax systems of modern democracies. The idea that a select few could wield power and wealth, justified by divine right or destiny, is a narrative as old as time. The pharaoh's legacy is the blueprint for how societies can maintain power through the art of persuasion, the illusion of divine sanction, and let's face it, a healthy dose of fear. But the cracks in this ancient facade are all too visible. Despite the majestic temples and towering pyramids, Egypt was not an egalitarian paradise. Class distinctions were as rigid as the statues that lined their sacred avenues. The romanticized view glosses over the reality of a populace burdened by taxes that funded their rulers' eternal bling. The system was designed to ensure that the wealth and power remained firmly in the hands of the few, while the many toiled in their shadow. Yet, even in the midst of this inequality, the Egyptians achieved feats that still boggle the mind today. Their achievements in architecture, engineering, and art are undeniable. But what about the social advancements? The idea of a centralized state with a complex bureaucracy was revolutionary. It laid the groundwork for future states to govern vast territories and diverse populations. The Egyptians mastered the art of administration, showing that the pen, or in this case, the papyrus scroll, was indeed mightier than the sword. So, what does this mean for us? The modern audience peering back through the sands of time. It's a reminder that while we've come a long way, some things remain stubbornly constant. The struggle for equality, the concentration of power, and the allure of wealth are issues that still resonate today. We may not have pharaohs declaring themselves living gods, at least not officially, but the echoes of their world can be heard in our boardrooms, political arenas, and even our social media feeds. The legacy of ancient Egypt's social structure is a cautionary tale wrapped in a glittering package. It's a testament to human ingenuity and ambition, but also a stark reminder of the inequalities that can arise when power is concentrated in the hands of a few. As we marvel at the pyramids and ponder the mysteries of the Sphinx, let's also remember the lessons they teach us about power, control, and the human spirit's unyielding quest for meaning and justice. In the end, ancient Egypt's story is not just one of kings and gods, but of the people who built the world's first great civilization, stone by stone, grain by grain. It's a narrative that invites us to reflect on our own society, to question the structures we inherit, and to strive for a world where the balance of power tips towards equity and justice. As the sun sets over the Nile, casting long shadows over the ancient monuments, we are left with the enduring question: how will we shape the legacy we leave behind? And will future generations look back on us with the same mix of awe and introspection? If you were a hopeless romantic in the Middle Ages, you might have found yourself in a bit of a pickle. Forget candlelit dinners and long walks on the moors. Medieval courtship was less about stolen glances and more about strategic alliances. Picture a world where true love could be trumped by the allure of a few acres of land and some well-bred cows. The church and economic considerations were the power couple of the day, and their influence was as pervasive as a medieval plague, minus the boils, thankfully. Let's start with the church, that omnipresent medieval institution that had a finger in every pie, including the matrimonial one. Back then, the church wasn't just the place where your great-great-great-grandparents got hitched. It was the ultimate arbiter of who could marry whom. It set the rules of the game, and boy, were they strict. Take consanguinity, for instance. The church decreed that you couldn't marry your cousin, or even your cousin's cousin, which probably made family gatherings a bit awkward. Yet, in classic medieval fashion, these rules were often bent by the powerful. After all, what's a little nepotism when a royal bloodline is at stake? The church's influence extended beyond matchmaking, poking its nose into economic affairs too. Dowries were the currency of courtship, and they were as varied as a medieval banquet menu. A typical dowry might include a handful of coins, a plot of land, or even a flock of sheep. For the upper crust, it could mean entire villages or strategic parcels of land. If the church was involved, you could bet they got their cut, or at least a say in where the sheep ended up grazing. Speaking of economics, let's not forget that marriage in the Middle Ages was a business transaction first, and a love affair second, if at all. This was a time when love letters were more likely to be ledgers detailing livestock than sweet nothings whispered under the moonlight. For the nobility, marriages were political chess moves. A well-placed union could mean the difference between securing a valuable alliance or being left vulnerable to a Game of Thrones-style upheaval. Kings and queens were less concerned about who was making eyes at whom and more about securing borders and fortifying their power base. Take, for instance, the infamous Eleanor of Aquitaine. She wasn't just a queen. She was a power player with a marriage portfolio that would make a Wall Street banker blush. First, she married Louis Roman VII of France, bringing the vast and wealthy region of Aquitaine under his control. When that marriage went south, Louis wasn't exactly the life of the medieval party. Eleanor set her sights on Henry Roman II of England. With that union, she shifted Aquitaine's allegiance across the Channel, proving that in medieval politics, love was a battlefield, and the stakes were land, not hearts. Meanwhile, the average serf was focused more on survival than romance. For them, marriage was about securing economic stability. A good match could mean the difference between having enough grain to last the winter or facing an empty larder. Dowries here were modest, perhaps a few hens or a portion of the next harvest, but they were as crucial as a king's ransom when it came to keeping the family fed. And let's not romanticize the notion of courtship as we know it. The medieval equivalent of going steady involved negotiations that would make a corporate merger seem like a casual chat over coffee. Families haggled over dowries, settlements, and inheritances with the tenacity of a medieval merchant at market. It wasn't unheard of for contracts to be drawn up detailing every last sheep and shilling, because love might be blind, but it wasn't deaf to the jingle of coins. Yet, despite the transactional nature of it all, medieval courtship wasn't without its moments of genuine emotion. Once all the contracts were signed and the sheep sorted, some couples did find companionship and even love. But in a society where survival depended on alliances and economic stability, love was often a luxury few could afford. The harsh reality was that in the medieval marketplace of matrimony, Cupid's arrow had to compete with the more pragmatic tools of a quill and ledger. So, while the troubadours sang of star-crossed lovers and knights, pined for their fair maidens in secret glades, the real business of love was happening in the counting houses and under the watchful eye of the church. It was a world where a good marriage was like a well-tended field. It required careful planning, hard work, and a bit of luck with the weather. And if you were lucky, maybe, just maybe, love would bloom amidst the bartering and the bargaining. But if not, at least you had the sheep. So, while you might picture medieval courtship as a whirlwind of jousting tournaments and serenades under moonlit balconies, the reality was far more practical, and often downright peculiar. Chaperone meetings were the medieval version of a Tinder date, but with your entire family swiping left or right. Forget privacy. Young couples often found themselves under the scrutinizing gaze of parents, siblings, and sometimes half the village. Imagine trying to sneak a flirty glance when your aunt's staring daggers at you from across the table. These supervised encounters were not just about keeping things chaste. Oh no, were also about ensuring that all parties, read, families, were on the same page regarding assets, alliances, and future prospects. It was matchmaking by committee, where the committee was more interested in the land you were bringing to the table than the twinkle in your eye. And then there were the gifts, the medieval love language that spoke volumes about status and wealth. Symbolic tokens exchanged between lovers could range from the sweetly personal to the aggressively transactional. A knight might give his lady a token, a glove, a scarf, or a ring, before heading off to battle, not just as a romantic gesture, but as a reminder of his fealty. Meanwhile, the lady might reciprocate with a favor, usually a ribbon or a handkerchief, which he'd tie to his lance. Romantic, sure, until you realize it was also a portable advertisement of his relationship status. Swipe right for taken. Speaking of knights, let's debunk the whole chivalry myth while we're at it. Forget about the image of a gallant knight rescuing maidens from dragons in distress. Most knights in shining armor were more interested in land acquisition than playing hero. They were like medieval estate agents on horseback, armed with swords, of course. Their primary goal was often to expand their holdings, either through marriage or conquest. If a damsel in distress just happened to come with an inheritance, well, all the better. But pure, selfless heroism, rarely on the agenda. Chivalry, in its original form, wasn't about romance at all. It was a code of conduct for knights, more focused on martial prowess and loyalty to one's lord than on poetry and roses. Knights were supposed to be brave, yes, but also obedient and brutally efficient on the battlefield. The romantic notion of chivalry only gained popularity later, thanks to the troubadours and their catchy tunes. These medieval lyricists spun tales of courtly love that were as fanciful as they were popular, creating a dreamy narrative that's persisted for centuries. Another staple of medieval dating was the grand, public display of affection, but not in the way you'd expect. Forget about kissing in the rain. More likely, you'd find yourself engaged in a formal betrothal ceremony, complete with witnesses to make sure nobody got cold feet. These betrothals were legally binding, akin to a modern-day engagement, but with the contractual weight of a prenup. There was paperwork, people, lots of it, usually involving the transfer of goods or property. Marriages themselves were less about the couple and more a community affair, often serving as critical social events for the entire village or town. And they could last for days, featuring everything from feasting and dancing to the occasional brawl. The ceremony was often conducted outside the church doors, symbolizing the union of two parties before the eyes of the community and guard. Only after this public declaration would the couple enter the church for a blessing, if they were lucky enough to have one. In all this, let's not forget the economic underpinnings. The exchange of gifts, the negotiations, the public ceremonies, all these were rooted in the stark realities of medieval life. Land was wealth, and marriage was a means to secure it. A good match could elevate a family's status and increase their wealth, while a poor one could spell financial ruin. It was an intricate dance of diplomacy, strategy, and sometimes genuine affection, all set against a backdrop of societal pressure and economic necessity. And while love stories from this era often romanticized the notion of star-crossed lovers defying the odds, the truth was far grittier. Love was frequently a secondary consideration, a fortunate byproduct rather than the primary objective. The real drama unfolded in negotiations and alliances, where the stakes were high and the outcomes could alter the course of history. So, as we ponder the peculiar rituals of medieval dating, Let's remember that, while the era may have been wrapped in the trappings of romance, the core was often as pragmatic as a ledger book. Behind every knight's valiant deeds and every lady's token of affection lay a web of strategy and survival, where the heart was often second to the head, and to the land that came with it. As we continue to unravel the tangled threads of medieval courtship, keep in mind that love, like history, is rarely simple or straightforward. Stay tuned as we delve further into this medieval love affair. But remember, in this world, love might have been blind, but it never turned a deaf ear to the clink of coin or the whisper of political opportunity. So, as we wade deeper into the murky waters of medieval matchmaking, let's steer clear of the saccharine tales of serendipitous love and focus on the gritty truth. Picture this: family alliances sealed not with a kiss, but with a contractual handshake that would make any modern prenuptial agreement look like a pinky swear. In a time when family mattered more than personal happiness, arranged marriages were the medieval equivalent of a business merger, albeit with more hay and fewer PowerPoint slides. Now, let's talk about parental meddling, the ancient art of matchmaking as practiced by the family elders. Picture your parents acting as the original dating algorithm, but instead of swiping left or right, they were weighing dowries and calculating land value. If you think meeting the parents is nerve-wracking today, imagine having them decide your entire romantic fate. The goal was simple: to ensure the family's prosperity and status, even if it meant marrying off little Edward to someone twice his age with a questionable number of teeth. Parents typically initiated these negotiations long before the couple ever set eyes on each other. In some cases, children were betrothed as early as age 7, because who doesn't want their life partner chosen before they can spell betrothed? This was less about child brides and more about securing alliances early. The medieval world was a volatile place, and ensuring that your lineage had a future often meant gambling on the right familial connections. The stakes were high, particularly among the nobility. A well-negotiated marriage could mean the difference between gaining a powerful ally or inadvertently inviting a rival into your family tree. In 1469, the union of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile is a prime example. This marriage effectively unified Spain, setting the stage for it to become a global powerhouse. Talk about a power couple. They were the Beyoncé and Jay-Z of their time, except their empire was built on land and thrones rather than music and fashion. But let's not forget the economic calculus behind these alliances. Dowries and bride prices were the grease that kept the wheels of the marriage machine turning. The dowry, often a mix of land, livestock, and cold, hard coin, was the bride's family's way of sweetening the deal. It was as if the bride came with a bonus package, not just a charming personality, but also a few acres and a dozen sheep. In 1225, Henry Roman III received a dowry of £20,000, a fortune back then, when he married Eleanor of Provence. That's like marrying into a $1 billion IPO today. The bride price, on the other hand, was paid by the groom's family to the bride's family, ostensibly to compensate them for the loss of a working member. It's a bit like saying, "Sorry for taking your daughter, here's a new ox." These transactions were not just formalities. They were essential economic exchanges that could bolster or bankrupt a family. The political and economic implications were immense. Marriages could change the balance of power within a region or even a country. And let's not gloss over the role of matchmakers themselves. These individuals were the Tinder and OK Cupid of their day, but with a lot more authority and a lot less swiping. Their job was to ensure that the social, economic, and political interests of both families were aligned. They had to thread the needle between ambition and reality, finding matches that would enhance family status without tipping the scales too far. It was a delicate dance, requiring the diplomatic skills of a United Nations envoy and the patience of a saint, or a saint's long-suffering assistant. But here's the kicker. Despite the cold-blooded calculations behind these unions, there was room for a little romance. Okay, maybe not romance in the way we understand it, but affection did bloom on occasion. Couples sometimes grew fond of each other, and there are records of genuine partnerships forged through these alliances. But let's not get carried away. These partnerships were often more about mutual respect and shared goals than about candlelit dinners and moonlit strolls. For the average medieval Joe, though, matchmaking was less about political strategy and more about survival. Families of peasants and artisans had simpler concerns, securing a spouse who could pull their weight, literally and figuratively. The ability to plow a field or churn butter was often rated higher than the ability to recite poetry. It was a world where practicality reigned supreme, and love, if it came at all, was a happy accident rather than a prerequisite. In this context, marriage for love was about as common as a three-legged chicken. But that doesn't mean it was entirely absent. There are tales, granted, likely romanticized, of lovers defying their families to marry for love. Yet these stories often ended tragically or comically, serving as cautionary tales against bucking the system. The message was clear. Love was nice, but land was nicer. And amidst all this matchmaking frenzy, let's not forget the paperwork. Medieval marriages were laden with enough contracts to make a modern lawyer drool. These documents detailed every last sheep, acre, and coin, ensuring that everyone knew exactly what they were getting into. The legalese could rival that of a Silicon Valley startup, with clauses covering everything from dowry disputes to succession rights. It was a testament to just how serious these alliances were, and how little they had to do with personal happiness. So, as we continue to unravel the tangled skein of medieval matchmaking, remember that behind every arranged marriage was a web of alliances, economics, and strategy. It was a world where the heart took a backseat to the head and to the ledger. But that doesn't mean we should dismiss the human aspect entirely. Amidst the political machinations and economic calculations were real people, living real lives, navigating a world where love was a secondary consideration at best. And who knows, perhaps in the quiet moments away from the negotiating table, some couples found a measure of happiness together. But as we move forward, keep in mind that in medieval times, love was often a luxury few could afford. Stay tuned as we continue to delve into this complex tapestry of medieval romance, where every thread tells a story of survival, strategy, and the occasional star-crossed lover. The medieval love story, if you could even call it that, was as much about maneuvering through social strata as it was about fluttering hearts. If you were a noble, your romantic escapades were more like a high-stakes game of chess, with family standing on the sidelines, ready to pounce on any misstep. For those with blue blood, marriage was the ultimate strategic gambit, an opportunity to climb the social ladder, or tumble down it, depending on how the dowry negotiations went. Consider the case of John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, who in the 14th century was practically the George Clooney of his time, minus the Nespresso ads. John married 3 times, each union a calculated move to bolster his family's power. His second wife, Constance of Castile, brought him a claim to the throne of Castile, which was less about tender moments and more a savvy bid for a slice of Spanish pie. And when that didn't pan out, John didn't drown his sorrows in wine. He simply moved on, marrying his longtime mistress, Catherine Swynford. It was a decision that scandalized the nobility, but was ultimately a smart play in the long game of influence and legitimacy, showcasing how personal affection could sometimes sneak through the cracks of political ambition. Now, if you were a peasant, your love life was less of a chess match and more akin to a game of dice, random, risky, and usually ending with the house, or in this case, the manor, winning. The social hierarchy was a rigid structure, with peasants often marrying within their own village or even their own family due to limited mobility and opportunity. Forget about climbing the social ladder. Most peasants were too busy climbing the haystack. The average peasant's marriage was a pragmatic affair, dictated by the need to consolidate labor and resources. Love, if it did happen, was a happy coincidence rather than a driving force. In this world, the quest for upward mobility could overshadow the tenderest of affections. Marrying up, or marrying well, was a dream for many, but the reality often involved marrying who your parents decreed was suitable. For noblewomen, this often meant being shipped off to a foreign court to seal an alliance, like some kind of medieval FedEx delivery, complete with a hefty dowry and a list of expectations longer than a knight's lance. Eleanor of Aquitaine's granddaughter, Blanche of Castile, became Queen of France through such an arrangement, her marriage orchestrated by her grandmother's experienced hands. These unions were less about sweet whispers and more about strategic whispers behind closed doors. Let's not forget the economic implications of these alliances. For the nobility, a marriage wasn't just a personal affair. It was an economic transaction with the potential to reshape entire regions. Take the dowry of Isabella of France, married to Edward Roman II of England in 1308. Her dowry was a staggering £18,000, equivalent to several £1,000,000 today, and included lands in Gascony and Ponthieu. This wasn't just a union of two individuals. It was an economic merger that had the power to sway political alliances and military engagements. And speaking of military engagements, here's where the myth of romantic, knightly love gets a bit of a reality check. Those chivalric tales of knights wooing fair maidens were often penned by bards with a flair for fiction. The real knights were more likely to be found polishing their armor than penning love sonnets. For the landed elite, marriage was another battlefield, with the goal of securing alliances and producing heirs, not whispering sweet nothings. The focus was on fortifying one's political position, ensuring the continuity of the family line, and of course, keeping the family estate intact. Love was a luxury that could wait, preferably until after the harvest. The social hierarchy dictated that love had to tiptoe around the harsh realities of status and survival. As the famed romance of Abelard and Heloise illustrates, even intellectual giants weren't immune to societal pressures. Theirs was a love affair that transcended the norms, but it ended with Abelard castrated and Heloise cloistered, a grim reminder that defying the status quo often came at a steep price. Their letters, filled with both passion and regret, are a testament to the fact that while love could be genuine, it was rarely free to flourish without interference. So, what did this mean for the average medieval romantic? Well, if you were fortunate enough to marry for love, you were likely an anomaly. For most, love was a secondary consideration, often crushed under the weight of political ambition and economic necessity. Yet somehow, amidst the dowries and alliances, genuine affection sometimes managed to take root. There's a bittersweet beauty in that, a reminder that even in a world governed by strategy and survival, the heart occasionally found its voice. As we continue this journey through the labyrinthine corridors of medieval romance, remember that every marriage was a microcosm of the era's complex social dynamics. Each union was a strategic maneuver that could elevate a family to new heights or consign them to obscurity. The stakes were high, the outcomes uncertain, and love, if it came at all, was a bonus rather than a guarantee. Stay with us as we delve deeper into this world, where the heart's desires often played second fiddle to the clink of coins and the promise of power. But wait, before you start penning a medieval romance novel in your head or lamenting the lost art of strategic matchmaking, let's bring this tale into the modern age. The truth is, while the trappings of courtship have evolved from castles and courtyards to coffee shops and dating apps, the essentials remain surprisingly consistent. That medieval blend of strategy, economic consideration, and social maneuvering. It's alive and well, just dressed in contemporary garb. First, let's talk about the great equalizer of modern romance, the dating app. The swiping right and left that now seems as natural as breathing is not too far removed from the medieval family councils that decided who was worthy of your hand. Except today, you don't need parental approval, just a decent profile picture. The matchmaking algorithms that promise to find your perfect partner are essentially the digital descendants of the medieval matchmaker, minus the intrusive questions about your sheep inheritance. Speaking of inheritances, the economic considerations of medieval marriages have morphed, not disappeared. Today, we might not huddle over ledgers detailing livestock, but financial compatibility still plays a significant role in modern relationships. The conversations that once centered around dowries and land have shifted to discussions about credit scores and joint bank accounts. It's the same song, just a different tune. In a world where money still talks, the echoes of medieval courtship can be heard loud and clear. And what about the social influence of marriage? Back in the day, marrying into the right family could elevate your status faster than you could, say, noble lineage. Today, while you might not be plotting to unite kingdoms, social circles still have a powerful sway. The modern equivalent might be marrying into a family with connections, prestige, or simply a great holiday cabin in the Hamptons. The stakes may not be as high as medieval thrones, but they can still shift personal and professional landscapes. Now, let's discuss the romantic myth of chivalry, which, surprise, surprise, continues to cling on like an overripe vine of idealism. The knight in shining armor trope has persisted, albeit with a few modern tweaks. While the armor has been replaced by tailored suits and the trusty steed by a reliable car, the notion of sweeping grand gestures remains. We still love a good story about a partner going the extra mile, even if it's just to pick up tacos at midnight. But just as in the Middle Ages, the reality often falls short of the ideal. The medieval knight was more concerned about land than lady love, and today's romantic heroes are often busy balancing spreadsheets alongside serenades. The truth is, the idea of a perfect partner is just as elusive now as it was when troubadours sang of courtly love. We yearn for the grand romance, but we settle for the person who remembers to take out the trash without being asked. As we look at how these medieval practices have shaped modern dating rituals, it's clear that the comedic and complex nature of romance is timeless. Human nature hasn't changed all that much in the last 1,000 years. We still navigate love with a mix of hope, strategy, and a dash of desperation. The settings may have shifted from the moated castles of yore to the bustling metropolises of today, but the dance of courtship remains as intricate as ever. So, what's the takeaway from this historical love story? Perhaps it's that the pursuit of love, while laden with societal expectations and economic realities, is a universally shared experience. Whether you're trading sheep or swiping right, the quest for connection is a fundamental aspect of the human condition. The heart, it seems, is eternally caught between the whims of romance and the demands of reality. In wrapping up this medieval meets modern tale, let's tip our hats to the countless generations who have navigated the turbulent seas of love. From the strategic alliances of the past to the digital courtships of the present, every era has its own version of romantic drama. The specifics may change, but the core remains the same. Love is both a battlefield and a comedy of errors, where the only certainty is uncertainty. And as you ponder your own romantic endeavors, remember that while the medieval world might seem alien with its knights and castles, it wasn't so different after all. The comedic and complex nature of romance bridges the centuries, reminding us that love, in all its forms, is a dance as old as time. Whether you're negotiating a dowry or a dinner date, the heart's pursuit continues, guided by both strategy and spontaneity. So, as you venture forth into the world of modern romance, armed with the lessons of history, take comfort in the fact that you're part of a grand tradition. A tradition where love and laughter, strategy and spontaneity have always walked hand in hand. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, amidst the chaos and comedy of it all, you'll find something that resembles that elusive, age-old dream, a love that lasts.